Hello everyone, I am Zazubaar, and welcome to the first episode of Zcast. Well, kinda. Okay, so what I'm saying right now is not the first episode, it's the intro for the first episode, so make of that what you will. But Zcast has kind of a complicated history leading up to this point of me finally posting the first episode, but I'll try to give it to you in 30 seconds or less. I pitched Zcast to my subscribers and friends of mine as a podcast in which me and a guest would start off talking about a particular subject and see where that conversation takes us. That was my pitch. That's what I wanted to do for the first episode, and that's what we did. Except this wasn't supposed to be the first episode. What you're about to listen to is not the first episode, or wasn't supposed to be the first episode. What had happened was I wanted to do the first episode with Nicola, good friend of mine. She's been on the channel a bunch. And my cousin Chrissy, who has only been on the channel in my movie. She's the girl who gets killed in the first minute of the movie. And I wanted to do a podcast with them about school, particularly high school, since me and Nicola and I had just graduated, and Chrissy is a college graduate. So interesting dichotomy there, or trichotomy, whatever. So I wanted that to be the first episode, since Nicola especially is the one who. She was the person who spoke to me that, I could pull off a podcast with a friend of mine, just because we have interesting conversations. So I wanted the first episode to be with her. The biggest thing of all, she's my best friend, so I thought that it would be fitting that it would be the first one be with her. But she's had one hell of a summer, I've had one hell of a summer, and so has Chrissy, enabling us to record that first episode. And now with us being out of high school for well over 2 months, it's kind of redundant at this point to do it. So maybe we'll do it someday. But in terms of being the first episode of Zcast, I don't want to sit on this podcast anymore, because it's a premise I want to get off the ground. And what a better way, no better way in fact, to kick off this kind of podcast, this kind of almost interview guest style podcast, almost like an audio talk show, than with probably my biggest YouTube idol. And I haven't announced this anywhere, so I'll announce it in the first episode. Ladies and gentlemen, in the audio you're about to hear, I got to have a great conversation with the great Captain Logan about the topic of creative writing. So I'm doing this intro to say I want you to ignore everything I say in the first couple minutes where I'm like, oh, this isn't the first episode, but we're recording it first, and yada yada yada. It's confusing. It doesn't make any sense, especially with what you're now hearing. So ignore my stupidity, ignore my ignorance, and just enjoy this amazing conversation. So I think that's about all the disclaimers I have to spill out there. Yeah, I don't think I have to spill out any more disclaimers aside from ignore my stupid, this isn't going to be the first episode, but we're recording it first, and whatever. And just enjoy the amazing, long conversation I had with the great Captain Logan. So without any further ado, I'll have Pass Bill take it away. Okay, hello everyone, I am Zazubaar, and we're doing a little bit of time warp fun shenanigans today. So, this is not the first episode of Zcast, or at least the first posted one. This is the first one I've recorded, and there are reasons why this is the first recorded episode of Zcast, but there's an episode that's going to go up before this, so if you've already seen that one, you know the premise of Zcast. But for me and my guest today, I would like to just briefly outline how Zcast works and just kind of the overall, gist of it, since this is the first time I have to say it, vocally. But first things first, let me introduce my guest today. So as I've established probably in the previous episode, so future me make note of that. This is a talk show basically, just me and a couple guests just kind of shooting the shit and talking about very particular discussions, and they kind of roll off into their own thing. But today, we got a real treat on the podcast today, because we got someone who I've wanted to have on my channel for a very long time. He's someone whose work I've been following for a long time, who has definitely inspired me in many ways. I'm sure he's inspired a lot of you out there here on YouTube. Today we have Captain Logan on the channel. Hello, Captain.
Greetings. Wow, what an introduction. Thank you.
You are very welcome. You absolutely deserve it, man. I mean, I'm not exaggerating this. I'm sure there's a bunch of reviewers out there, a lot of YouTube guys who've been like, Captain Logan inspired me to do this kind of review, inspired me to do this, so you absolutely deserve it. And it's an honor to have you here today.
Well, I just need to mention before we continue, Zazubaar, that according to the Temporal Prime Directive, I cannot disclose anything about the future.
Oh, okay. All right, so I won't ask you. So we'll leave that to future Bill to worry about.
Well, either of us, we have a responsibility since this is getting posted
in a weird order.
Yeah, we have to be very careful not to tell it.
We cannot break the first law of time.
Yes, exactly.
We'll be very careful. We'll be very careful not to create a paradox or accidentally create a child who shouldn't be born. Well, we won't mess anything up. We'll keep the timeline flowing well. Okay, so Zcast. Today we will be discussing a topic that's very, very close to my heart. Something I do way too often. More often than people I know should think to do. And it's something that you see with Zcast, it's very much so, I want to talk about this, here's the person I think would be most fun to talk to it with. And creative writing is something I have done as far as I can remember, in varying degrees of qualities and varying degrees of forms. And creative writing is something I wanted to talk about now, and this is why we have this weird recording order, because it's something I just kind of associate with this time of year, and I don't really know why. It just kind of does. So that's why I wanted to do this now. But so we're going to be talking about creative writing today. And Cap, where I kind of wanted to start with it was kind of like the main inspirations and how you kind of got into it, because it's something where it's like, writing and creating fictitious writing is something that it definitely didn't come naturally for me. So but let me just ask you this right off the bat. What were kind of your first steps into creative writing?
I was always a really creative person. I was always somebody, when I was a kid, who wanted to make things. And being productive was always really important to me, regardless of what that meant. I always wanted to make stuff. Some of my earliest memories are picking up very large objects in my house, or in my parents' house, and stacking them on top of each other and saying they were cities or like contraptions that did various things. I was always trying to build things. I'm not mechanically minded in any way whatsoever. And so I never went from there to anything mechanical and actually building real things, tangible things. From there, I thought when I was 5 or 6 I was going to be an artist, and I was drawing pictures all the time, and I said I'm going to grow up and be a famous artist. I never got good at that either, at all. And so writing ultimately became the thing I fixated on because it was something I could do. And I always wanted to create. I always wanted to make my own things, and I was always really, really interested in fiction, especially genre fiction, science fiction more than anything, but other kinds of stuff. And so I started writing a lot when I was like 11 or 12. After I I kept dabbling in drawing, but I pretty much abandoned drawing.
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually started out in a very, very similar way. My earliest memories, and I've talked about this a ton on my channel, but since this is Zcast and I'm going to have it stand on its own, as a child, Godzilla was my life. So as a kid, my earliest memories of like being creative in the way that Cap described was, it's like, I remember mainly setting up like the sets that you would see in a Godzilla movie. Like one of my favorite and most nostalgic memories is like I was watching King Kong vs. Godzilla on a Saturday morning with my brother, and we have a living room, a very generic living room, and the movie was playing on the TV, and of course it's the fight scene. That's the only scene. That was the only scene I would really get my attention grabbed by, and that's the scene I love the most. And basically what I would do is I would pull the cushions off my couch and set up the mountain scenery you see in that scene, and then me and my brother would beat the shit out of each other like we were Kong and Godzilla. Of course I was Godzilla, and he was Kong, and of course in my version I won. And the film, I love that movie, but come on, really, Kong wins anyway. But very similar to what you're describing, which is interesting. But I too started out in drawing, and it's funny because I still suck. I still draw every now and then. Like, here's the thing: I just finished high school. So when I look back at high school, it's very hard to sit down and write when you're bored in class, in my opinion. I don't know, Cap, did you ever find yourself, like, writing out stuff in class when you were in high school? I don't know, maybe you were a more attentive student than I was?
Only notes. I wouldn't really sit and actually write stories or write parts of stories. But things would hit me. Where I would like an idea for something, or I would think of I would be working on a project and I would think of an idea for it in the middle of class, and I'd write that down. Ironically, no, I did a lot of doodling in the class. They were bad. They were bad doodle. I couldn't even doodle well.
Me neither. You look at my science notebooks especially are a mess. They're just, the margins are all filled with shit that makes no sense. Like, I remember one where I basically drew like a waterfall, and then around it just like a bunch of crazy, like, weird, like, creatures and shit. It's just like, when you're sitting in class and you're very bored. A lot of classes I was not a fan of in high school. You sit there bored, and you just kind of let your imagination wander, the very, archetypical, daydream. And, you just kind of let your mind wander, and you kind of put stuff on the page. For writing stuff for me, it was like, very similar to you, but I wouldn't write down notes. I would draw posters for the stuff I wanted to do. Like, I just made a movie recently, and, the very inception of that movie, I was sitting in physics, and I just started drawing the poster for the movie, and that's where the concrete stuff came out. And I apologize for the background noise. That's where it would start, and then when I got home later, I would start to write it. Out. But I too started out in drawing, but let's go back a little bit more to kind of how, because for me, it was very much so what I was watching when I was young that got me into writing, and that got me into creative stuff. So, I already mentioned Godzilla, but Cap, what was some stuff, like some TV shows, some movies that kind of like said to you, I want to create stuff like this, either for a living or just I want to create stuff like this, stuff of my own.
Yeah, when I was 11 or 12, I started drawing and writing my own comic book, and it wasn't really a comic book because I knew I couldn't do sequential art. I knew I was a bad enough artist that I wasn't even going to attempt sequential art. So I just did what I called a magazine, and I created this superhero named Cyberzorp. And I did like 9 or 10 issues of that. I found those recently. I still got them. And
cool.
And they were just these kind of fun little like magazines that were kind of geared toward kids, because I thought, well, I can't really write. I had the sense to know that I didn't know anything about the real world, and so I would write things that were geared for little kids. And I'd say, well, an 8-year-old would totally love this. Even though adults would have no idea. Adults would look at it and be like, "No, that's not how banks operate. What's wrong with you?" I would I would work on that, and I would draw them, and the drawings weren't that good, so I mostly just wrote stories, and then like drew a couple pictures around them. And I was inspired a lot at that time by things like I was reading a lot of Spider-Man comics at the time. So I mean, a lot of comic book stuff, but Spider-Man, Batman, the obvious stuff. But then, like, I don't know, Power Rangers. Weirdly enough, at least at that period, just visually, I guess I was thinking a lot about like alien space weapons and like Megazords and big mech robots and stuff, and I never cared about that stuff later, but like at the outside of Power Rangers, but at the time I was like I'm gonna do my version of the big cybernetic crazy thing with some virtual reality in it, because virtual reality was really big at that point. Everybody wanted to live in some virtual world, and we got out of that quickly, but that was kind of that period. But no, my inspiration for doing just like prose fiction actually came more from reading novels when I was a kid. Well earlier than that. When I was 7 or 8, I was reading a lot of classic literature. and I was reading things like Treasure Island and Robin Hood and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and stuff like that. And I think that's what really got my mind going, racing and like my imagination going, and thinking that it's really fun to create something where people have to imagine everything off the page. And that's the thing that eventually I kind of went back to, and those were my big memories. It was just reading fiction, and that was kind of so unlike you and unlike a lot of people these days. I never really imagined things as movies. I didn't do that. I mean, I was interested in maybe at some point writing like a movie script or something, but that's not where I started. I thought that writing short stories and novels was harder, and I wanted to get good at that because I thought it was harder. You know what I mean? I always thought, well, writing a script is easy. It's just a bunch of people talking. I can do that. You know what I mean? I would think, creating an entire world, I would have to tell you things about what you were looking at. And I always enjoyed, I guess my point is, I always enjoyed the process of the movie playing in my head as opposed to somebody giving me the movie. And so then after that comic book phase, I was always collecting comics, but I wasn't reading comics as much as I was reading fiction. So when I was a teenager, I was reading in a preteen into teenage, I was reading Goosebumps and Animorphs a lot, and those things were big at the time. So I started getting really into fiction that was, this is weird, fiction that was derived from television and movies, things where the people who made them clearly were thinking like televised science fiction and that sort of thing. And I ate that up with a spoon because that's what I wanted to do, because I didn't know if I would ever be talented enough to actually make a movie. And I knew I wasn't talented enough to make a comic book, but and so I didn't know if anybody would ever film my scripts or draw my pictures. But if I was a one-man band, I could do anything I wanted to. So that's why I got more into prose.
Right, which is interesting because I kind of started off very, very differently. For me, writing took a long time to strike me as I should do this, because I was like you, I couldn't draw, and I had to really teach myself to really this is how you use a camera, motherfucker. And it took a long time for me to learn how to do that. I mean, you look at the movie I just made, you're like, that looks really bad, Bill. What the fuck are you thinking? And I'm just like, that's the best I got, guys. No, for me, it really started with movies, and that's because I would watch, again, whether it was Godzilla, whether it was something. It was like, I remember Ghostbusters was big for me in terms of inciting, stories in my mind, and it was like, I would remember going out in the back and pulling out the hose and spraying it like it was a proton pack. I remember vividly doing that as a kid. But for me, it started out with movies because I was like, and this is a problem I had for a long time. I had an amazing epic story in my head. Oh God, this would be so cool. This would be amazing. I would visualize it like it was a movie in my head. And I tried for a lot of years to put it on, to steal my mom's video camera or anything, or act it out in front of friends, and this is why I was one of those big in the backyard playing Spider-Man in the backyard with my friends, because I was feeling at a movie set very, very young on in my life. The problem was I didn't know jack shit about putting it on paper. And if you look at a lot of the stuff I filmed when I was a kid, it's all off the cuff, all came up on the spot, because I didn't have I had a very hard time as a kid putting it on paper. And that's not something that struck me, just like you, until I started reading comic books. And it was really weird. I never thought to put something on paper until I saw other people doing it. Because when you're watching a movie, you're watching visuals. You're watching it happen. And there's nothing about the movie as a kid telling you this was written on paper.
Yeah, when you're a kid, you're not thinking about the process. You're not thinking about some guy sitting around in a room trying to decide what their movie's going to be about, or somebody writing lines of dialogue on a piece of paper, late at night while they're on a computer or something while they're sucking down coffee trying to meet a deadline. You don't think about that kind of stuff.
No, you just think about the final product. You visualize, you see just the characters in the movie. You see, Jurassic Park was another big inspiration for me. You see the dinosaurs wreaking havoc and being majestic in that. And I never thought someone sat down in front of a computer or in front of a typewriter and wrote all that out. I was like, oh, Steven Spielberg went out there, shot it, and just said the dinosaur's going to do this, and he had a dinosaur there, obviously, because dinosaurs exist. And he filmed it, and that's how I operated for so many years. Again, until I started reading comics. And like you, I couldn't draw for shit. But I fucking tried.
Thing is, I don't want to sound like I'm all really hoity-toity and like I didn't watch movies. Obviously, I watched a lot of movies.
Oh no, sure, yeah.
Obviously, movies inspired me. But what would happen is, I really liked prose, and again, I thought it was something I could do. And again, prose writing is extremely difficult, but it was something where, well, I can put words on a piece of paper. And so I started writing, like, sequels to movies they never made sequels of.
Oh, that's interesting.
In prose, that was something I did when I was a little kid. I wrote, and I never finished them, you know what I mean? I'd write, pages and quit. I remember at one point I tried to write the sequel to Independence Day. I remember at one point I tried to write Chucky 4.
Oh my God.
That was before Bride or Seed of Chucky even came out. I remember I tried to do that, and I was like 11 or 12 when I tried to write that. I don't know why.
You saw those movies that young?
Yeah. My dad actually let me watch those movies that young.
What?
Yeah, I know. That probably explains some things about the strangeness that is me. But I don't know.
Everyone, yes.
And everybody knows that I'm not a horror buff, and I'm not into gore, and I'm not into language, but I did watch some movies like that. One thing I did much later, I remember in junior high, I started doing some fan fiction. I don't really care for writing fan fiction now, but I was doing it back then, and I wrote, and I think I was going to write maybe 2 or 3 of those, and I think I finished the first one on like a cliffhanger. It was like an Animorphs Star Trek Voyager crossover, where like the Yeerks take over the Borg, because I thought that'd be cool. So like the Yeerks go into the Borg's minds, and then it was like the story about it's trying to explore the idea of whether or not it's still a collective consciousness. And so I did lots of stuff like that. So yeah, I definitely was inspired majorly by movies and TV shows, but I was always writing it as prose.
Yeah, and it's funny because again, I never thought that that's what it took until I started reading comics. And Stan Lee, another huge inspiration for me. And like I remember around when the first Spider-Man movie came out. This is where I'm going to sound. This is where the age difference between you and I starts to come out, because it's like I was a kid when Spider-Man came out, and I know, and you were like in high school or whatever. I
was a senior. I was dating.
Oh, so you're where I am now. That's interesting. Okay.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's interesting. Sorry for making you feel old.
No, not at all. No, it's okay.
I'm kidding. No, but yeah, when the first Spider-Man came out, I was it's interesting because I say this to people when I talk about how I got into superheroes. Batman got me into the idea of superheroes. Batman TAS got me into the idea of superheroes can be cool. And then Spider-Man got me into comics. Because Batman was never we're getting into kind of a tangent here, but again, it's okay. Conversation goes where it will. Batman never struck me as a comic book idea when I first saw it, and that's going to sound really weird. But when I first saw Batman TAS, I was like, oh, okay, it's a guy running around in a cape, fighting bad guys. I never thought to associate that with comics. It was weird.
That's not strange at all. Batman's the biggest influence that led to Batman was Zorro.
Yeah, right.
And I mean, and a lot of and there's a lot of noirishness that goes into Batman. No, that makes perfect sense. He is not intrinsically a comic book character.
No,
I think Superman kind of is.
Yeah, which it explains why I didn't get into Superman until much later. I mean, I don't really consider myself becoming a Superman fan until like, I don't know. Not even when like Superman Returns came out. It was actually, and this is gonna sound weird, it was actually almost around the time when I started to get into your channel, because I don't know if I've ever told you this, but the first video I ever saw yours was your Superman Doomsday review.
Oh wow, and you kept watching.
And I kept watching. Yeah, I've been following you for years, dude.
It's amazing you kept watching after that video.
Well, I got interested. I mean, I know you say that that review is it's obviously not the show it is now,
no.
But you said things in that review that were really interesting to me. You said things that were like, oh, I never thought this way about Superman, but It was around that time where I started, and because I remember seeing that movie when I was younger, and I actually liked it when I was a kid. I haven't seen it since then, so, but I was like, oh, I don't really remember if this was good, so I'm going to go see a review of it, and that's when Superman started to become interesting to me. But back to the whole Batman thing. So Batman didn't strike me as a comic book character, and then when I saw the first Spider-Man movie, and then a couple weeks later, I got into a '90s animated series, which people might lynch me for this. That's my favorite version of Spider-Man. Because that's kind of my Spider-Man.
Oh, it was mine too for a good long time. I enjoyed it a lot in the '90s. I just don't think it holds up all that well. At least it doesn't hold up as well as well. Saying it doesn't hold up as well as Batman is an obvious thing to say, but I don't think it even holds up as well as X-Men.
I haven't. It's funny. I didn't really grow up with X-Men. I've seen it. I've seen the cartoon, and it's really good. I think my favorite episode. Do you remember the one where it's the first time they did Nightcrawler and Wolverine goes through this huge thing about religion?
Yes.
That really fascinated me. That's probably my favorite episode of that show.
Cool. They did that on a Fox TV show. I guess for me it was kind of like growing up and learning more about how to tell stories, and the biggest thing that annoys me watching the Spider-Man show now is just the sheer amount of flashback to things that we've already seen in the series. That show is so padded with just like, I always wondered what their episode budget was on that show, because they would have 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes of animation we've seen already.
Oh, they did that constantly.
They did it constantly.
Yeah, I researched that show a lot after I got into it for a while. They the first season was actually very they had a sizable amount of money to do it, and then as the show got more popular, they lowered the budget, which makes no sense to me. But that's what they did.
It's happened with other things.
Yeah, isn't it so bizarre though?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just what the fuck is wrong with you? And you see in that show there are action scenes that are comprised of nothing but stock footage, and or you look at there's this shot that always sticks out to me. I don't remember what episode it was, but there's one where Kingpin is talking to Alistair Smythe. And the shot of Alistair is so out of place because he's not in the right chair. And he looks like he's doing an action shot, but he's asking Wilson Fisk a question. And it's so bizarre to me, but that's when I started getting into comics. And that's Spider-Man stuck out to me as this is what comic books are about. This is how, because also that movie was such a big deal for comic book movies becoming so popular. So comic books started to become, a much more popular medium. So I started reading them, and then of course, you get more in how they work and stuff. You start reading books written by Stan Lee. You start reading encyclopedias and stuff. I remember, I don't know when this came out. Maybe I don't know if you remember this. There was this big white book about Spider-Man's history, and I don't remember what it was called. It had him on the cover, and it was like the Big Book of Spider-Man or something. I don't remember the title.
Was that one of those like DK encyclopedia type things, or was it something else?
No, I think it was a DK thing. I don't remember. I probably still have it.
Because you remember DK has made a bunch of those. I mean,
they did. I know they did an X-Men one too.
Superman one. They did a Catwoman one, which blew my mind.
What? How is it as thick as the other ones? It can't be, right?
Not quite. It's about half as thick, but it's still. It was still amazing to me that they even made that.
Was this wasn't around? Was this around the time of the one with Halle Berry, or was this around the time of Batman Returns?
Oh no! I don't think DK was even doing those books at that point. They might not have even been in business back then. I don't know, but
no idea.
But no, this was around the Halle Berry movie.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. They started doing that a lot when those movies started coming out. When the movies started coming out, and that's when I read that book.
Yeah, 2004. It came out the year Catwoman came out.
Oh, it did. Okay, yeah.
It's called Catwoman: The Visual Guide to the Feline Fatale, and yeah, it's a DK book.
What's the cover?
I'm not honestly sure exactly
how to describe it.
Well, I wanted to tell you who drew it, but I'm just not sure. But it's early 2000s goggles Catwoman. It's the Hush suit.
Oh, it is. Okay. I was wondering because I'm like, that book's for kids, man. What kind of Catwoman are they going to put on there? And of course, she went through that whole purple period in the '90s with the giant boobs.
Yeah, I don't care what anybody says. I love that purple suit. I like it. But I grew up with it. I like Catwoman with a tail. A lot of people don't like Catwoman with a tail. They're like, that's going too far. I don't care. I like it.
I don't. Yeah, it's so bizarre. I don't know. I've never.
Entirely impractical, but I like it.
Catwoman has always been a character who was like, when she shows up, I'm like, cool, but I don't know. She's never a character I found super interesting. But even in her appearances in TAS, I never found super interesting. I mean, her first episode is not even great to begin with, and then her future appearances are just kind of eh. But anyway, so when I started seeing, the way Stan Lee put together comics and stuff, and like, I started reading that stuff. That's when I started to write my own comics, and I remember, and this is a funny story. Okay, so you can't get into Spider-Man and Marvel without, of course, learning about the Fantastic Four and stuff, and starting to watch those cartoons. And I remember watching. Have you ever seen the Hanna-Barbera Fantastic Four, the one with the really bad animation?
Yes.
Okay, so that show was on really late at night on Boomerang, and I remember catching it, and that's when you find out, of course, he's called the Human Torch, and you find all the names and stuff. You learn about the Fantastic Four. That for some reason, his name really pissed me off. I don't know why.
All right.
It was so weird. Like, it's like, okay, so let me tell this story. So, I got into Marvel and stuff, and I started learning about all the characters, and I was like, why would they waste the opportunity to not call him Fireman? Because this is the whole point where you're like, if you stick anything in front of the word man, automatically a superhero. So the idea that they wouldn't take the opportunity to call him Fireman angered me. So when I was in second grade, I remember putting my teacher always had we had a creative writing section of the class, and she had these little packets of white paper with boxes for pictures and then lines for writing. And I remember writing one that was called something like The Laser That Turned People into Fireman. And it was so bizarre. It was literally just this laser that would shoot out and turn people into this fire, basically the Human Torch, just called Fireman. It was so weird. And it's so bizarre because I'm like, if I saw the kid, I'm like, what? Why do you care what they call him? But it was such a weird thing. But it was that kind of stuff that got me working on, stuff like comics and then getting into writing and stuff. So for me, the movies got me into the field of being creative, and it was the comics that got me into actually sitting down and writing it. But it's interesting because did you find yourself very early on? Nearly everything you wrote was either what could be classified as fan fiction or was basically taking the same premise of a character you saw in a movie or something else and then wrote your own story to it, because that's what I did.
Yeah, and when you're a kid, I think for a lot of kids that's gonna happen. And makes a lot of sense. I mean, you're writing the thing that's inspiring you to write in the first place. So you say, this is wonderful, I want to make something like that. As a kid with not a lot of personal experiences to draw from, and being fascinated by the thing that you're trying to emulate, you end up emulating it completely. And I did that quite a bit. And I think for a lot of people do that and don't realize they do that and do it forever. I think that can happen. But yeah, I also don't think that, especially as a kid, it's a bad place to start, because I think it's just like tracing. I'm not saying that you should necessarily show it to anybody. But when you're emulating, you're getting the feel for styles. You're taking something that you that you really appreciate and that impressed you, and after a while, if you keep working at it, and if you start developing your own ideas, I think all of that background ends up being actually quite useful. But I also think that anybody, even when you're a little kid, I think that the most important thing to do is to read constantly.
Yeah. Definitely, I think that's definitely a good point. It's like you should definitely have an appreciation for and a knowledge of what you're trying to create in. If you want to write novels, you should probably read a lot of novels, because you want to know, you want to kind of know what you're getting yourself into, and that's not to say that you can't challenge the overall general accepted notion of this is how a book is supposed to work, but you can't not ever read a novel and then be like, I'm going to write a novel and expect it to be good.
I think that's true. Sure. I also think that the best writers like reading.
Oh yeah, for
sure. I believe
sure.
that, and I don't care what you're writing. I don't care if you're writing movies or well, I guess if you're writing comic books, you're reading comic books. But I'm just saying that I even think the best comic book writers like reading novels. That might to some people sound a little bit prudish, but I really believe that, because what you're doing if you're writing if you're doing a lot of writing and you don't care about doing any reading, you're basically saying you're basically putting yourself above people, and you're saying I love doing this, but I wouldn't buy it, I wouldn't read it myself. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, like, yeah, if you're doing movies, I guess it's a somewhat different thing. But here's the other thing too: if you're just writing scripts, and I'm not saying that you have to be a great novelist or a great short story writer to write a good movie script by any means. I do think you should dabble in it. I do think that you should try your hand at it, because script writing employs part of, but not all of, what you have to do to write fiction, to write.
Oh, absolutely.
And what I think happens when you're writing scripts is you actually think you have more freedom than you do, because it seems easier than writing novels. And as I said earlier, it actually is a little bit easier in my mind to write a script than it is to write a novel. But it's not as easy to organize. And it's not as easy to give exposition, because you can't give exposition in the more natural way that
you can't do it in prose. It's got to be in dialogue.
You have to do it in dialogue or do it visually somehow, and that's all very difficult. So what you're doing is you're writing in a limited medium, not realizing it's limited, thinking that your toolbox is open all the way. And I think it's better to dabble in prose first and realize just how big the toolbox is before you get to a more limited one. I really think that.
I completely agree with you. It's interesting. I usually start out. When I first started writing, the movie I just made is called Werewolf of Carl Place. And when I first started writing the script, I didn't write it with any screen directions in it. It was all very prose, fiction-esque, almost like a short story. Or I guess it'd be more of a novella, since the script is about 113 pages, so you cut down the screen directions, it's probably about 85. So when you just write the dialogue, you just write the scenery, and you just write what the characters are doing, then, it's easier, I think. Well, not easier, it's like, you don't have to put yourself under the leash of it's got to be in this format, so that way a director can read it and turn it into a visual. And that's something I also struggled with for years, because it was like, it was very very hard for me to fit into that structure. I still don't write correct screenplays. A friend of mine is taking a screenwriting class. He's about a year older than me, and I sent him the script for the movie I just made, and he was like, I can't really read this because it's not written in the right way. And I'm just like, all right, well, that's not terrible. I'm directing it too, so at least I know what it says. Because that's an interesting thing. If you're a young amateur director, I'm sorry we keep bringing this back to movies, but it's if you're a young amateur director and writer, I think that it's almost kind of like that's what's going to happen. You're really going to be the only one who can read your screenplay, because you're the only one who, if you don't know how the structure works, and that's something I had with this movie in the previous one I made, where it's like I show it to people and they don't know what's going on because they don't know how scripts work, they don't know what was going on in mind, they don't know how I'm visualizing as the director. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that a lot of great screenplays, great movies, scripts, they start out as really great outlines. And outlines aren't written with screen directions. So I completely agree with you.
Well, here's the thing. When you say screen directions, you're talking about narration, and in a screenplay, you're supposed to give as limited narration as possible.
Exactly.
Basically, you're not giving notes to a director so much as you are telling a story visually. What that means is you're basically in a script going to write dialogue. You're going to tell us where things take place, and you're going to tell us what people are doing in a scene. Most of that narration between when I say narration, I don't mean I mean narrative. I mean like what a person is doing in a scene. The stuff that's in italics. What you're usually those directions in between lines of dialogue don't last more than 3 lines.
Sure.
Three or 4 sentences. And something that they tell you when in a screenwriting class is to leave as much white space on a page as possible. Your average page of a screenplay is going to be a minute of time,
Right.
On screen, and so people get this notion that people who have not looked at screenplays or who haven't taken a class think that you have to spell everything out for a director, that you have like notes on where to put cameras and things like that. None of that is in a screenplay, and in fact, action scenes are very often not even entirely spelled out. A lot of it. A lot of what's more important is simply where are they, what are the dramatic beats, what's important for the scene, and then if it's like a fight or something, who wins, that sort of thing. But yeah, so here's the thing. When you're writing a screenplay, it's all about minimalism. It's about getting your ideas across as concisely and economically as possible. Writing prose is not that at all. And
No.
you have a lot more freedom. I mean, like you have to be more economical with your words in a short story than you do with a novel. But compared to like I said earlier, compared to a screenplay, the toolbox is wide open. The reason I think people should try their hand at some prose before they attempt a script is because it's easier to like throw a bunch of words out on a page and write everything you want to get out than it is to figure out how to minimalistically tell things in as few words as possible. I feel like you got to do one before you can get to the other. So a screenplay, as I said, it's easier in that you don't have to write all that narration. You don't have to. You don't have to tell me what your characters are thinking. You don't have to tell me what's in a room, and you don't have to decide what is important of what's in the room as much, you know what I mean?
Right.
Figure out exactly how to describe it. In a screenplay, I might say that, my characters are outside next to a phone booth, and there's like a table and chairs there. Go, you know what I mean? But like obviously, then you're allowing a director to do some of that visual storytelling for you. So I don't know. I just think that a lot of people fall in love with movies and don't like reading and get it in their heads that they can be writers without being readers, and I don't think you can do that.
No, yeah, if you do it, you're going to have a very limited. I think you're going to have limited success. I think is what we're kind of saying is like, because because again, storytelling at its core is you have to be able, your audience has to get what you're trying to say. Your audience, and I remember we talked about this when we did the Geeky Gentleman episode on Death of the Author.
Yeah.
Your audience has to be able to get what the story is what you're trying to express with the story, and if they don't, it's not their fault usually. It's usually, you're failing some way as the writer. And I think that that's absolutely true, and I think that that's something that someone who doesn't know enough about what they're trying to create is going to find, because they don't know the successful way to get across your idea. You can get across any idea you want, any way you want. You just have to get across the idea.
That's exactly right. One of the most important things a writing professor ever told me This was Adam Denoyer back at KU. I live by this. He said, and I've said this a million times. He says you can get away with anything. You just have to get away with it. And what he means by that, because that might sound like rhetorical nonsense, what he means by that is a lot of ideas are going to sound really far-fetched at the core. You can say, here's a really recent example. If somebody told me 2 weeks ago they're going to make a Superman movie where Superman kills someone, I might say, I don't know how you're going to pull that off. And someone else might say that's impossible to actually make that idea work to actually work in a story. But what if it could work? And so it's just a matter of doing everything you have to do to make it believable. And then what a person says is, well, how do you know? How can you be sure that what you're doing is believable? And the answer to that is you can't until you have a lot of people read it, until you have some workshopping. What I mean by workshop, you don't have to have a formal workshop. I just mean, having people sitting down, reading it, giving you constructive criticism, and then a lot of revision. Famously, and I don't remember who said this, but a famous author, and this has become like such a popular thing to say that I don't even remember anymore who said it, said that 80% of writing is revision, and that's true. I spend so much more time on my manuscripts revising than I do actually writing them. And I'd say my two biggest pieces of advice for first-time writers, people that have not done much of this or haven't done any of this at all, is that first thing. You can make anything work. You just have to make it work. And B, write till you're done and then start revising. The worst thing you can possibly do, especially if you're writing something longer, is to start revising chapter for chapter,
before it's done,
or even paragraph for paragraph. I think it's very important to get it out. To get it all down on the page, and my third advice, which is related to the second, is allow it to suck until you're done. Until let it suck till it don't suck no more.
I completely agree with you. I think that it's called, a lot of people call it verbal vomit. It's like, just get all the stuff you wanted to say out there on the page, because if you don't put it on there when you think it, it's probably going to slip into your mind and never come out. And that can be terrible, because some of the worst ideas ever can be turned into really interesting ideas. If you look at creative people who have created very iconic and very these great things, a lot of what they create comes out of mistakes or comes out of like limitations. If you look at something like Doctor Who, you watch it and you love it, but almost everything that it does is because it's a slave to a low-budget television show. The blue box is because that's easy to get around a set. Almost everything about that show that people love is because that when they first created it, they had to go like, okay, we have like no money, let's create a science fiction show.
A lot of great ideas come out of minimalism.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is true of television. This is true of the stage. I don't know if you're aware of this, but you mentioned Doctor Who. I guess I feel obligated to say this. In the original Star Trek series, the only reason we have a transporter is because they didn't want to have to pay to show a shuttlecraft going between the ship and the planet every week. Right. That was, Roddenberry came up with a way to make it seem pseudoscientific, but that's a device to get you from one place to another real fast, and that's become kind of a science fiction staple. A lot of things use something akin to a transporter now. It's exactly the same kind of thing, and that's why I always encourage people to be as minimalistic in their stories and in their scripts as possible. Zazubaar, I don't know if you've thought of this or if you do this yourself, but something I like to tell people is until you're more confident in your writing, until you've got the idea that requires 12, 14 characters and you're ready for that, don't use more than 3 characters.
Huh? That's interesting.
And again, I live by that. When you're like write a short story, write a 1-act play, write a short film. Keep it to 3 characters. I don't mean that you can't occasionally have maybe some random people, like you need a bellman or you need a busboy or something. I just mean of the characters that are going to be around and have speaking roles. Keep it simple.
That's hilarious, because that's exactly how the movie I just made functions. That's really interesting. I do. That's something I came to realize, because it's not interesting, because it came out of the same thing we were just talking about. It came out of limitations by the medium. I made a movie with no budget, and I had to use my friends as the actors, and I don't have a huge group of friends, so I wrote a script where I knew, okay, these are my limitations, and I want to tell this story about a werewolf. Let me do this. And I basically used, there are 3 major actors in the film, and one of them doesn't even have a lot of screen time. And then of course you have bit parts where it's like, oh, I have to have someone get killed by the werewolf who's not part of the main cast. Okay, I'll get my cousin and film them getting killed. And it really allows you to really key in on both character development and getting inside the character's head. Because if you're writing a huge cast without a lot of writing experience, a lot of those characters are probably going to either be one-dimensional or zero-dimensional.
Yeah.
They're just going to be they're going to be very flat. It could lead your reader or your audience member to be like, there's so much going on, I'm so uninvested in it, I'm just going to put it down.
A lot of people think that being creative or using your imagination means being as big as humanly possible. And I think it's important to restrict yourself. Now, I said earlier, to start with prose because it's less restrictive, but I'm talking about a different sort of restrictive here. Okay. Because, you're gonna be overwhelmed if you've never done much writing before, and frankly, a lot of people that have done a lot of writing get overwhelmed. I'll tell you, I don't mind admitting to this. It's been a while since I've written even short stories, much less novels, because I've been focused so much on nonfiction in the last few years with the stuff that I do for the channel. And Spawn Year is the closest thing to fiction that I've written in a couple of years. And that's a bizarre way to tell a story too, by the way, because
by channeling it inside of reviews.
Well, yeah, the review thing is weird. The fact that it's all done by journal entries is weird, and the fact that I can't revise it is the craziest part. Because I said 80% of writing is revision. When I did Spawn Year, I said I'm going to do it all handwritten, which means I have to record my first draft. I did that for a story element. I'm mentioning this, by the way, because what I am currently describing is something that I would not encourage anyone to ever do, or at least to do until you've to do something that crazy and out there until you've got some experience. I think it is important to know what the rules are before you start breaking them. And this was my attempt to see if I could do any decent storytelling by handcuffing myself to some really crazy ideas as far as breaking standard rules of not standard rules of narrative, but standard rules of the mechanics of narrative. It's not usually, although I do have that minimalism thing of I'm only working with one character most of the time.
And then one character who barely speaks.
A couple of characters because at least I've got an antagonist, Yeah. But I guess the reason I bring that up is because it's more of an experiment even, because I said, okay, McFarlane, not to dog on McFarlane too much because I do that on a daily basis right now. McFarlane in Spawn seemed to have been doing that. He didn't seem to really have a plan. He didn't seem to really know where he was going. And he also didn't seem to do very much revision even on a issue-to-issue basis.
Right.
And he made a lot of weird continuity mistakes in something that didn't have all that thick of a continuity for a long time. And so I thought, could I do anything like a decent story that way? could I go issue to issue having or like day to day having no idea where I was, well, not no idea. I mean, I had ideas of where I was going. And I think McFarlane did too, to a degree. But like shackling myself to these issues and not knowing what each one was, but then having to plot around it as if I did. And you know, it's been a fun experiment, but I wouldn't encourage anybody to actually try to like write a book that way or try to write a movie that way. Revision is an incredibly important tool. To have at your disposal. But yeah, so it's been a long time since I've written anything, and I guess or written anything in like a fiction piece in the standard way I would usually write it.
Right.
And the reason I mention that is because I sat down the other day to do some writing exercises because I felt a little bit rusty, and doing the Spanier thing has kind of dulled me a little bit because I'm reading a lot more not well written fiction. Fiction, and that's not good for you. It's really not. It's kind of like, as a writer, as somebody trying to live the writer's life. It's like eating nothing but burritos every day. It's a bad idea. You shouldn't do it. And but you know, it's an experiment. I wanted to see if I could do it. And this is like the crazy grandiose version of that thing I did several years ago where I watched an entire season of 24 in one day. You do it just to see if you can do it.
You did that?
Oh yeah, and I made videos about it. They're still out. But that was real early when I first. That's actually how I met Shades at Night, because we had. I'll just say this real quick. This has nothing to do with anything. I did that, and I kept my Skype open all day so that and told people about it. So if anybody wanted to come on and talk to me while I was watching 24, they could. And that's how I met Shades at Night. He came on, and he I think he was with me for like 13, 14 hours or something.
Holy God!
That's how I met Shades. Yeah, he and I were talking over text all night long while I was watching 24. But anyway, so I'm rusty, and boy, when you come back to it like this, it's like starting over, man. It's like you've never done it before. And it's not that I've lost everything. It's not that I can't do it anymore. It's that you sit down with no idea what you feel like writing, with no story to tell yet, with no characters that you've kind of got promptly planted in your brain. And I feel like where I was before I wrote my novel. And then I remembered how much of a challenge it was to get a sense of where that was going and what exactly I wanted it to be about. And so what I'm saying is, for people that are experienced, you will have periods points where you'll sit down and it will be like the first time. And there's something frightening and also really enticing about that whole experience. I don't want to talk too much about my own work, but I do want to mention where my novel started.
Sure. Oh, absolutely, please.
Because I want to give people. I don't want to turn people off to wanting to be beginning writers, but I also don't want to give people the impression that those of us that do this a lot, or that have been published, or I don't make a living at doing that, but folks that do, I don't want to give anybody the impression that it's that like you get to a point where it's the easiest thing in the world and you don't have to work at it. It is work. And I love where my novel finally went, and it started years before I actually finally conceived it as a novel and started writing the manuscript that became The Girl with Seven First Names. Originally, it was a serious piece about with a ridiculously, ludicrously stupid idea about a girl who had 7 multiple personalities and was a psychiatrist. And I wrote a short story with this character, and her name was Helena, and that's what she became in the novel too. And it was this short story about this girl who is a therapist, and between therapy sessions is arguing with this homicidal personality in her head that wants her to kill all her patients. And that's what it was. And it was a really dumb idea. And because I couldn't make that believable. It was really cartoony. It was really silly. But the idea of a woman with a bunch of personalities that was a therapist, I thought was kind of cool, and I wanted to figure out how to make it work. And it never gelled. And I was talking to a guy in college in a writing class where I was about to start working on a project. We'd just been assigned something, and so I had to come up with something to write for a short story, right? And this guy, I was talking to this guy about this idea, and I said, several years ago I had this idea, and I want to resurrect it, but I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to make it work. And he said the thing that turned it into what it is. And he said, that has to be a comedy.
Wow. And
I started thinking about it. And he said two things. He said, A, it has to be a comedy. And B, he said, she cannot be the protagonist.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And I said, why? And he said, because nobody could possibly relate to her. He said, you've got to have, now maybe it could work. I mean, like I said earlier, you can make anything work, you just got to make it work. But he said the thing that made me figure out how to make me do it the way I could do it, and that was, this person with 7 multiple personalities can't be your main character because you need like every man in there to deal with all this, because it would just be too confusing to have somebody that was jumping between personalities like that constantly. And that's how, and that's when I invented Franklin Bryce, who I came to love more than the person who was originally supposed to be the protagonist. Incidentally, now that I've done that novel, when I finally write the sequel, I do intend to have Helena actually be the protagonist and finally figure out how to do it. Because now that I've done it the easy way, I think I know how to do it the hard way. But it also helps because, spoiler alert with my novel, but I did get rid of one of the personalities, so I at least don't have 7 anymore.
The girl with 6 first names. Like, it's a reverse sequel thing. You think it's a prequel, but it's a sequel.
Yeah, you're like, are you working your way backwards or forwards? How does that work? Anyway, I don't know what point I was making in bringing all that up, except that conceptualizing these things is a process, and usually, just as you said earlier, you said something really smart, Zazubaar, and that was that you are going to get a lot of your ideas from mistakes. You're also going to get a lot of your ideas completely accidentally.
Oh yeah, well that's the beauty of writing. Because this is something you kind of got into a little bit earlier, and I just wanted to say it because it's something I totally agree with. It's like the challenge always has to be there. I don't think, and it's like you can never be a great writer and get complacent with your writing. I think you should always be testing yourself, because if you get complacent with it, if you're like, oh, writing is so easy, I'm just going to bang out this story about a guy who has godlike powers who's going to save the world, then it's, if you get complacent with it, what you have is either going to be really bland or really bad. You have to constantly challenge yourself.
And usually probably entirely formulaic.
Right, exactly. And we've seen how long, I'm sure you'll attest to this, how much of that have we seen with superhero movies. And
how much have we seen with that with movies? With
very especially recently,
especially in the action genre.
It's funny. I don't know if we saw the same trailers, because me and you both saw Man of Steel within the past few days. The trailers before the movie was one of the ones a movie with what's the name of the guy who played Green Lantern? Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, Ryan Reynolds, right.
The resurrection or whatever the fuck, the afterlife police department.
RIPD, the Rest in Peace Department.
Did that not look like the same exact movie as Men in Black?
Everybody's saying that. I didn't get that from it.
I had no idea what that movie was, and the minute I saw it, I was like, is this a Men in Black remake?
I guess I'm getting where people are saying that. I honestly, I didn't even have that in the slightest, but...
Well, I mention it because it attests to what, you remind, because when you just said that, it reminded me of it, and I was like, oh, we're repeating the same...
It's likely to be very derivative of that film, now that you mention that, sure.
Yeah, and I don't know what the creative team is behind it, so I don't know if it's similar people, and I'm more forgiving of stuff like that when it's similar people, because it's like, they'll take an idea they did in the past and then do something different with it, like James Cameron did that with the Aliens universe, with the Avatar, and then Ridley Scott did it with Prometheus, in both Alien movies. It's that's kind of where I'm more forgiving. But anyway, back to where we were kind of going before. It's interesting that you bring up the process you had with your novel, because I had these, and I'm sorry I keep bringing it back to my movie, but I just finished that, and that's kind of creative writing. That's what I'm most like fresh in right now. That's where my experience is like currently. And the character in Werewolf of Carl Place is a character named William Stone, and he's a monster hunter, and he's a character I came up with like 7 years ago. And he's just been evolving and changing ever since into the character he is in the movie that I just made. He started out as a totally different thing, and you just have to keep up with an idea like that, because all I had initially was the name of William Stone, because that just sounds like an awesome name, in my opinion. And you start out with that. I started out with that name, and then over the years, it just constantly kept changing and evolving, because originally he was a spy. And then I decided I had this idea of I want to do for monster movies what Indiana Jones did for adventure movies. It is totally inside the genre of something that came years ago and no one likes anymore, of the adventure serials. But it totally gives it a fresh take, a fresh coat of paint, and says, this is awesome. That's what Raiders did for the adventure serial kind of genre, the 30s, archaeologist movie. Yeah. And monster movies have had a massive dry spell in the past few years. So I was like, I'm going to do that for monster movies. I'm going to create a character who is born and is so engrossed in that world, but make him awesome and show people, who are not big fans of it like me, why that genre can be awesome and why it's still why it can still be fun. And that's where William Stone came out of. So then, and William Stone went through this period where I don't really remember. It was after the spy idea. And then it went into something like, oh god, and then I remember now. This came out of like the period where Terminator Salvation came out, and everything was all post-apocalyptic. And I was like, okay, I want to do a trilogy with this character, 3 movies. Each one's going to be a different kind of monster in the post-apocalypse that he's going to fight: zombies, werewolves, and the ending will be aliens. And that was the kind of premise, and I wrote an outline for each of those movies, and they were terrible. And they didn't make any sense, and then the character just kept evolving, and I don't know why zombies stayed in my mind for so many different, drafts of this is who William Stone is, because then it was like, he was like an ex-mercenary who fought zombies. The only things that stuck with the character the whole time he was boggling around in my head was, sorry I keep dropping coins, he's got to have a backwards hat, and his main weapon has to be a machete. That's it. That's all he has. And that's all that is stuck to the current version. So after that whole post-apocalyptic thing, then I was like, it's too similar to Terminator. It's too similar to the zombie craze. Let's go back to present day, and let's do it as kind of like, let's do it as a more traditional Monster Hunter thing. Let's do it kind of like Hellboy if Hellboy was a person. And, or a human, or so to speak. So then it became like, he was a character who he killed a cop by accident, and this was the draft up until this year. Then it was like, okay, so he would kill a cop by accident, and he would be thrown into a mental institution, and because after the grief of that happening, and then he would break out and go search for Bigfoot. And that was the whole idea, and then that was the draft up until this year. And to get back to the point we were addressing earlier with, you kind of, great ideas are birthed out of either restrictions or certain places you can put them. My school does this thing called the Senior Exploration Program, which is like you get out of class in the last few weeks of school and you have to make a project for it. And I was like, oh my god, that's perfect. I'll make a movie. And it would be perfect, and I would actually get to make one. And that's when I started to retool William Stone for making to be able to make it, to be able to bring in the life in a movie. And that's when it turned into Werewolf of Carl Place, and now that's where the character is now. And it's just it's really fascinating to hear other writers who go through that similar thing, where it's like a character or an idea starts out so different, and then it just evolves into a totally different thing, and what you end up with is something really interesting, I think. And I don't know, maybe I'm the only one who finds William Stone interesting, but it's like, I don't know, for me it's like William Stone was such a stupid idea. or such an idea that was so, like, it was hackneyed, to say the least. A spy with an awesome name, James Bond, anyone? And then it turned into something I think is very original, but that, again, maybe that's just me.
What's important, I think, is to keep your mind open and not to be married to your brilliant, genius, amazing ideas, right?
Right, exactly.
Characters will evolve naturally, both at their inceptions. You know, when you come up with ideas for what you think it's going to be, but then as time goes on, if you're not married to it, something will strike you. Different things will happen in your life, or as you're conceptualizing it, you'll see something, or you'll notice something, or you'll read something, and you'll say, this actually might be better if I go in a different direction with it. This also is important, though, for plotting, for character development. I'm very anti-outlining when it comes to fiction. I think that a little bit of that is okay, to kind of play toward an ending, to have an idea of where it's going to end. I always start stories in books that way. But I think it's important to allow your characters to come alive enough that they will steer your story for you. Some people don't believe in that. Some people think that's ridiculous. When you start doing it, and you start really coming to where you understand a character that you created, it really does, in my experience, a good protagonist will steer your fiction. What I mean by that is character-driven fiction means that the plot is affected entirely by choices characters make, and that means that outlining can become really problematic, because you might come to understand the character more than you did when you wrote your outline, and then you come to find that at this point that guy wouldn't make that choice anymore. And if I'm married to an outline and I force him to make that choice, all of a sudden he's acting against character. And I think a lot of action movies and other sorts of things get bogged down by this plot driven and sometimes formula, where most action movies are kind of the same movie, especially from especially early '90s forward, or even there's a lot of '80s movies that are that way too. But man, especially we had this huge problem in the mid '90s with action movies that were just all exactly the same movie. And if you go and look at that, you find that not only are most of those characters really stale, familiar, we've seen them before, they're stereotypes even before they're archetypes, but also they're not the ones really steering the story. They're sitting in a roller coaster, and the roller coaster is taking them where it's going to go, and we're supposed to enjoy the ride in the roller coaster. I rather think that rides are more fun when we get into the minds of the people that are steering them.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. I completely agree.
That's not to say that everything must be character-driven. Sometimes intent matters, and there is a whole genre of melodrama, and those things are not by their nature character-driven, but they're different things. They play by a different set of rules. I think it's important to recognize that. I gave Sin City a 4 out of 4. That is not a character-driven film. I also cannot hold it to the same standards as I would hold, something like Batman Begins, for instance. They're doing different things. That's a different genre, even though they're both based on comic books.
Right. And it's one of those things where it's like, this is interesting because, again, it's like you start out with an outline, and when you write an outline, you're not really getting in the character's head usually, because you're just outlining this is what's going to happen. You're not like saying this is the character, this is why he makes that decision.
You can't flesh out a character from an outline.
No, well, you're only going to flesh out the character once you start either writing him in dialogue or writing him doing stuff.
Well, partly. Now, I will say that you can begin the process with lists, not outlining, but with fleshing out a character on paper. I don't personally do this, but I've known people who have, and it seems to work for some people. It's just not something I've done a great deal of. Some people will meticulously like write out lists of what their characters own and where they go and what they do, and then they'll decide that they've got a somewhat fleshed out character from all of that. Not that they know everything about who the character is or how they would operate, but it tells you things. What a character has in their refrigerator tells you things. What a character has in her purse tells you things about her. And these are details that might just come out in your fiction, but sometimes people will actually start before they even begin writing, taking a protagonist or even an antagonist, and writing out some of those personal details, and then that informs that character. It's not outlining, but it's prep work. And I think some prep work is a good idea. Heath Ledger did that famously in his creation of the Joker. He wasn't even writing that character. He had a script. Somebody else wrote it. But in trying to become that character and figure out who it was for himself, he did that. He made lists of what he thought the Joker would have in various places. And I don't know if you know that, but I mean he wrote down lists of things.
I've seen that recently. Someone sent me a video of someone found this, and I was like, oh my god, that's so cool. He had like this, he had a little like notebook. It was filled with like cutouts and like writings of like inspiration stuff for the Joker. I remember I think I saw like there was a picture of oh god, the guy from a Clockwork Orange was in there, and just different stuff. And there was like some like 20s like comedians and stuff in there. It was really interesting.
This is neither here. Well, clearly he was looking a lot at The Man Who Laughs, but also Nolan was too. This is neither here nor there. But I always wondered after I reviewed The Crow if he didn't go back and watch The Crow.
Well, visually, and let me just say this: thank you for introducing me to that movie, because that movie's awesome, and I never would have watched it if I wouldn't have seen your review. I remember watching it, and not only does he visually, Brandonly look like how Heath Ledger looked as the Joker,
he walks like him.
He walks like him. The way he talks to the people he kills, it's like he acts like he's so much more above them, and like
then there's a strange kind of gleeful quality to what he does when he's killing people.
Well, he's taking revenge. So it's like, and he's being, as you pointed out in a review, he's being allowed to do this, because a lot of times, and I think the really great point you brought up in your review is like a lot of times in revenge movies, the character is being compelled to not take revenge. That it's viewed as morally either ambiguous or just morally wrong that the character is going on a vendetta against another either antagonist or whoever.
Yeah, the universe is encouraging him there.
Exactly. And it's really interesting, and it allows him to be as gleeful and as like really enjoying and being very, very vaudevillian, if you will, about what he's doing.
Yeah, good point.
I'm remembering the scene where he goes inside the antiques or the pawn shop or whatever, and he just like he really tortures this poor guy with his words and with what he does and all this stuff. And it's a very effective performance, and I can definitely see where that he could get it from there.
He and the Joker are entirely different characters, but the Joker has some of that in that he seems to morally justify everything he does with a lack of morality. And so, like you said, I like that you said he sees himself as above everybody. That's exactly right. He sees the world in a way he feels like nobody else can see it, and he's trying to show that world to people twistedly by destroying them. And so, there's not a fiber of his being that thinks that there's anything wrong with what he's doing because he doesn't live by society's rules.
No, exactly. He's just a dog chasing cars. Oh my god, I love that scene. That's probably one of my favorite scenes in all of cinema, because I'm just like that is the Joker. He's just a dog chasing cars. I wouldn't know what to do with one if I caught it. It's just he's such an interesting character, and you could definitely see where like his performance comes from in that, and his performance as the Joker is very much so one of like he had to become the Joker, because when you look at the Joker, that's not Heath Ledger. That's the Joker.
Yeah. And what you've got there, bringing this back around a little bit, is you've got. I mean, not that he's not the protagonist of that story, and we're not following him constantly. So there's a lot of mystery with that character. We don't know we don't really get in that character's head, and we're not supposed to. But Heath Ledger did. That is not a two-dimensional character. That guy is fully fleshed out. He exists in that reality, in a way that Nolan understands, in a way that Heath Ledger understands, and that is the beauty of storytelling. Even when to make it recognizable to an audience that this character is completely fleshed out and whole and becomes a real person. At least he did to me. But I don't fully understand him. I'm on the outside. But you've proven to me that he's real, and that's power.
Well, it also really works well for that franchise because the Joker is a character who it's like, who the hell in that kind of Batman universe is going to dress up like that? And Heath Ledger's just like, oh, no, this is why, because he's being very theatrical about it, and he's trying to make a statement. And I gotta ask you this,
yeah.
Do you think that Heath Ledger wrote out basically like the secret history of the Joker in that notebook? Do you think he wrote it out, or do you at least think that he kind of worked out, okay, this is the story of the Joker that no one will ever know, but I know, and I'm going to incorporate it into my performance?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way to know. It's possible.
Yeah, because
it's likely, even.
It's interesting because another similar character, and we mentioned this earlier, another similar character that is the Doctor from Doctor Who. I was listening to Matt Smith do an interview on the Nerdist podcast, and he was talking about how before he played the Doctor, before he ever read a script from Stephen Moffat, he spent weeks writing fan fiction for the Doctor, trying to work out how he wanted the Doctor to talk, the Doctor's personality, and he said he did that by writing out the Doctor gets trapped in like this time thing, and he has to spend a great deal of time with the world's greatest geniuses, and they just have conversations. And it's a really interesting way to get into your character's head because I don't know how familiar you are with Doctor Who, but we never find out a lot about the Doctor's past.
That's right.
And I'm sorry, I don't know because you don't talk about that much. I don't know if you're a fan or not. But we never find out about his past. We don't know his name. So it's like he's one of those characters, and the Joker's like this too. We're never going to find out. And of course, in the Dark Knight continuity, we don't know the Joker's name either, and we really don't even know it in the comics. So it's like the person performing it has to sell that they know it, and that's important.
Yeah, so do the people that are writing it.
Exactly, and that's something important for fiction too. And again, not to take it back to my movie, but that's something that's in my movie as well. William Stone almost has a tragic origin, but it's not in the movie. Because I was writing under the assumption that I don't need to spell this out for people because it's not important to this story. And I'll say it here because it's never really going to be spelled out until years down the line or whenever I write the story. His father was a race car driver who died in an accident when Will was like 7. And the whole thing behind Will's character is that he grew to be obsessed with understanding mysteries because he didn't understand why his dad had to die. Because there was nothing he could see, because in his mind it's like, why couldn't I have stopped him from getting in the car and racing that day? Why did it have to be that day that he had to die? All this stuff really stuck with him and kind of traumatized him because he was like, why didn't I jump out on the racetrack and be like, Dad, don't go driving today? But never in the movie, there's one scene where I kind of spill the beans, but never in the movie do I say, oh yeah, his dad died. It's mainly just like one scene, his mother makes a quip about his father where Will reacts to it really like aggressively. And there's another, and of course, the hat he wears says Stone Racing on it. So we know there's some kind of past in racing. And we see in the final action scene, and not to spoil the movie, I won't spoil the ending because it doesn't really spoil it. He's talking about death, and he takes off the hat, saying that he understands it. So I was trying to very much so hint to the audience that was a factor without spelling it out. Yeah, it's something that I've tried to incorporate into it too. It's a very interesting process, and it's one of the beauties of fiction writing, where it's like there's this and being people who live in this culture. It's like there's a beauty to not having things spelled out for you. there's a beauty to, I wonder if this is a factor. It's like, why is the Joker this way? We can speculate about why. We can talk to each other. Like, me and you could have a conversation about, like, hey, do you think this is why the Joker is so fucked up? And it's like, we may never figure it out, but we'll have tons of fun and tons of, we'll put on our thinking caps for figuring it out. And I think that's one of the beauties of fiction and of being in this culture.
Sometimes as writers, it's very difficult to make that determination of when what an audience needs to know and what they don't. The rule of thumb for me is the events that are happening have got to make sense.
Right.
If I'm not thinking of any good examples, but when you're writing, especially prose, when you're going, one sentence should escalate into the next sentence, into the next,
right.
And then paragraphs work that way as well. So each event, we need to not be in the dark as to why characters are doing what they're doing or why they are where they are. So I understand the Joker's motivation without knowing what his background is. Do all characters need their backgrounds told to us explicitly? Not always, and sometimes, but more often there is a point being made when it's not. I think that is a deliberate thing to be done somewhat sparingly, but it just depends. And sometimes it's just not important at all. You know what I mean? Sometimes, a lot of people live by. We understand characters a lot better when we meet their parents, or when we meet whoever brought them up, or some of their family members. That doesn't mean that every major character in a book do we have to meet their parents. You know what I mean? That kind of thing can get really cumbersome. So it's important to the story that you're telling. I don't mean that it's necessarily something that you've got to be thinking about thematically. I also wanted to mention this quickly, just because it hasn't come up. I think it's important to mention that theme is really one of the last things you should be thinking about while you're writing a story.
I agree with you completely, yeah.
Themes very often will begin to develop on their own, and this is something Stephen King says, and I agree with him wholeheartedly. Stephen King says that theme is developed and fleshed out in rewrites. Theme is not something that you start with, and it's not something that you kill yourself over while you're writing. You might notice it start to envelop, and or start to develop. You might notice it start to come to the surface as you're writing, and it's fun to see it happening, but you really shouldn't force it.
No.
What I always tell people is, don't ever, this is my example, don't ever say, today I'm going to write a story about AIDS. Say I'm going to write a story about a person who has AIDS. There's a distinction. If you're writing a story about AIDS, that means that you are making a statement about it, that you're going to make a message, and the reason you're making your story is a message, and that's probably going to become very preachy. Stories start with characters. Flesh out a person, and then two big things create theme. One of them is your own personal experience. One of them is just who you are, what you believe in, what you care about, what you stand for. Those things, if you are a thinking, feeling human being that's writing that's writing with gumption, you are probably going to see some of those things come out on the page without even thinking about it. Allow that to happen, because it's a lovely feeling when you go back and look at it and you see it. But the other thing is those things come from the character that you create. Where your character works, job stuff's really important, and hobby stuff is really important. Where your character works, what your character does for fun, the person that your character has chosen to spend their life with, say they've got they've got a significant other, where they live, all of those sorts of things. What kind of cars they drive. A lot of these sorts of things. The theme comes from weird places, and like I said, it's never the thing to start with. So when reviewers say, when hoity-toity reviewers like me say, what is this story about? I don't think we ever mean that you needed to have known that before you started. It's really not a good idea to say, I'm going to write a coming-of-age story, or I'm going to write I'm gonna write a a father-son story. I think those things happen. I think they.
Right.
Because otherwise you're either going to be preachy or you're going to be formulaic. You know what I mean? You're gonna fit it into a mold of a story that we've seen told 100,000 times, and sometimes that happens, and you actually should do that and put your own spin on it, because there are, the two examples I just mentioned, those things never get old. The coming-of-age story never gets old. It's been told since the dawn of time. There's a reason for that. The father-son or the mother-daughter story, or the father-daughter story, those sorts of things, that never gets old. The story about the guy who goes back to his birthplace for the first time in a bunch of years to get his affairs back in order. That story never gets old. But you got to put your own spin on it.
Right.
Or even the opposite of that, the story about the stranger that comes to town, that somehow changes and shapes the town in a new way. That story's been told 100,000 times. Never gets old if you tell it if you put your own personal spin on it. And I think people need to not be afraid also of those building blocks. To say, oh man, I'm writing a story that's been told before. I think it's a bad idea to say I can't tell an alien invasion story, because those have been done before. I think you can tell an alien invasion story. I think to try to reinvent the wheel, you're going to fail every time.
Well, I think that it comes into play where it's like you don't want to tell an alien invasion story where you want. I really like Independence Day. I want an ending just like that, where the planes fly up into the thing and blow it up.
Yeah, sure. But the beginning premise, I'm gonna have some aliens attacking. Well, there's a million things you can do with that. There's no reason not to do that again. Again, we mentioned Superman earlier. Man of Steel did an alien invasion story, and there were things in there that I had not seen before. I think it's a good alien invasion story.
Especially in Superman.
I think Independence Day is your standard alien invasion story.
Yeah, very much so. So if you start out with that basic outline, and then you're just like, okay, I want this and this and this to happen, and then decide why, then I feel like your movie's going to be very forced. I remember I tried to write. Have you ever seen Okay, we'll start here. Have you ever seen Mystery Science Theater, the movie?
Yeah.
Okay. So you know the movie they're watching, This Island Earth?
This Island Earth.
This Island Earth.
Normal view.
Yes. I tried to write a remake for that movie, where it's basically Independence Day, which doesn't make a lot of sense because it's like that movie is not really it's a very different kind of alien story. And I remember the reason why I stopped writing it, why it didn't work, was because I was trying too hard to be like, I want to make a big, giant alien explosion blockbuster where aliens blow up New York City, woo! That kind of stuff. And you start out there, and then your movie's really forced because you're forcing situations to contrive around, I want this scene to happen. Something that almost happened with the movie I just made. The ending, if you ever see my movie, the ending is not what I originally wanted it to be, and I like it better because it makes more sense. I think it's more impactful for the character.
You've got to let that happen if your characters are driving it naturally.
Yeah, because if you read the outline for the movie, it's a totally different situation. The last half hour of the outline, or if you adjusted it to movie time, is like a totally different thing from what's in the movie. And there are bits of it where you're like, oh, I can see where that idea started. The bare bones premise of the last action scene is what's in the outline. The situation is totally different. What happens is totally different. Why it happens is totally different. And I like what came out of it better. Now, this is kind of leading me into a question we should probably should have either started with this or brought it earlier. How much of yourself do you put in your characters? How much of your life do you incorporate into the world that you create for these characters? Because I know I do it a lot and maybe too much.
I don't think you can do that too much.
Interesting. But how much of it do you do?
I think I think it's important that you understand two things. One thing is you're going to naturally include yourself in a lot of things that you're not realizing you're doing because you're the person writing it, unless you're just deriving straight from other stuff. And so, like this will happen somewhat subconsciously. But as far as deliberate stuff, when it comes to like jobs and hobbies and things like that you want to make, no matter what you're writing and what genre it's in, that you want to make believable, if not realistic, I think you either have to use entirely things that come from your own personal experience, or you've got to research to the point where you feel like you've done it.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel very similar about it because it's like, I write. And I can't help but put in like, when I write, it's like I incorporate parts of my life into it because I feel like it makes the character more believable. It also makes the character more, unique to me because it's like you're your own person. I don't care what anyone says. Each image, you, I, everyone else we know, all their own people. If they all wrote a story about themselves, it's not going to be the same as the other person who wrote it.
People resist very often, especially if they're writing genre fiction. People resist using themselves at all because they feel like to be original, they have to make up everything. Making up everything is a terrible idea because it comes from nowhere. It comes from nothing. Someone once said that fiction is just reality exaggerated. And when a lot of people that are writing just like mainstream fiction, not genre stuff, just dramatic fiction based on life stuff. A lot of people, a lot of successful writers take an event that happened to them and tweaked it slightly, and that's not any more or less. It's not any less creative or original or a good idea than if you were to completely come up with everything. I think what a lot of people get, I think a trap that a lot of people fall into is thinking that their fiction, and I alluded to this earlier, that everything they write must be an original, brilliant idea that will blow someone's mind. That's not what fiction's about. Fiction is about revealing truth through creating characters, through creating moments for characters, and in revealing those truths and peeling back those layers and discovering things about ourselves by making stuff up. That's what fiction is. You've got to use yourself. You gotta put what you are in there. The most important thing is to make yourself credible. Is to make your writing credible. And the way you make your writing credible is by making me not question things that happen or what's there, what the world is. What I mean is, if your character is working at a Taco Bell, I've got to believe that it's a real Taco Bell. I've got to believe that that all of the things that they're doing there, that the details that you put in there are really what would happen at Taco Bell. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to work at Taco Bell to write a guy that works there. It means, as we said before, you can make anything work, right? What that means is I have to believe that in this world, that's what Taco Bell is like. Mm-hmm. That's a huge distinction. Believability is everything. Realistic and believability, two entirely different things. Believable fiction is not necessarily realistic fiction. This is what suspension of disbelief means. And some people think that suspension of disbelief is me watching anything and turning my brain off and saying, well, I buy it because it's not really happening. Suspension of disbelief, Zazubaar, is not on the audience member. It's on the person writing it. I have to suspend your disbelief by making you believe that, and by tricking you. I have to trick you into believing that whatever I put in my book or in my story, in that reality, is really how it works there in that universe where you don't question anything, and that's what's most fun about it. I've got to buy that anything that happens there happens. So the world of the Tick works a lot different than the world of Star Wars. But I buy bizarre, crazy stuff that happens in the Tick because its internal logic is different than other internal logics. So when Brainchild has this big, crazy weapon that can grab the moon and move it toward Earth, and it takes all episode to get there, I'm buying it. Because they created this bizarre, hokey, crazy reality where that can happen. But you got to trick people. The thing is, not every reality that you create is a super heightened, nutso out there reality. Ergo, much of the time you really do have to know what you're writing about. And that means that if you want your Taco Bell to feel like a real Taco Bell, you probably do need to either work there or hang out with somebody for a while they are working there, or at least have some long, involved interviews with someone who has worked there. And even then, I don't know if you'll get it 100% right. This also, I'm sorry, I'm being long-winded. This also works with dialogue. It's the same thing. It is not important that the dialogue is realistic. It is important that it is believable, and those are two entirely different things.
Yeah, well, you have to, when you write a character, you have to be like, okay, this character, that's exactly what would come out of their mouth at this particular moment, and that's how that character talks. You see a lot of like, I find myself sometimes, perusing the internet, I find some fan fiction or whatever, or some, really amateurish writing, and not to say that mine isn't, but, you find something where it's like someone was up late at night and they decided to write some bullshit on their computer, and, the dialogue can sometimes be like, I want this person to say this because it sounds cool, but the character they've come up with, or lack thereof, it doesn't really fit with them. And it's interesting that you say, you just kind of got into research. I think that research is one of the most important and one of the most telling signs of the success of a piece or whatever it is you're working on. If you look at something like this 1976 King Kong movie, that movie is fun, but it's not very good. And it's because the movie is very unimaginative, but it's also very it's very stereotypical in that it's just a giant monster movie, and there was no research done into creating a world around King Kong. If you look at the original King Kong, or if you look at the 2005 version, those are both really interesting worlds. They're really successful films because they create these worlds because the people Peter Jackson spent like a year before he made that movie finding out, A, how gorillas lived, and then B, he started looking into paleontology and also the way that tribal villages lived. So him and his production team could create this really fascinating world around the already established mythos of King Kong. Which, if you're interested in that, there's an amazing book that came out years ago called Kong, King of Skull Island, which is all about that, and it's fucking awesome. And if you go back to the original movie, the people who made that movie, the guy who came up with the idea for King Kong, I don't know if you know this, his name was Marion C. Cooper, and he wanted to be an explorer. And the idea was he always wanted to, he got fascinated by the idea and the mystique of gorillas, because back when he was, in his early 20s, when he was just a young guy, wanted to be an explorer, no one knew shit about gorillas. So there was a mystique around them, and he created the world around it. But he was an explorer. He had an interest in that world. He didn't just say, I want to make a really popular movie that's going to feature a giant monster. A, giant monsters weren't really an established genre yet, and B, it's like you look at that and it's like that's not really interesting because there's no flavor to it. We touched on this earlier. It becomes kind of bland. But I'm sorry, I ramble when it comes to giant monster movies. I don't know if you noticed that about me, but I know so much about the history, I just kind of ramble about it. But I brought that up just because I just wanted to kind of cement that I agree with your point that you have to, research is one of the most important, but also one of the most interesting parts of a film.
Well, here's the thing. Let me say this too, just with basic story writing. Research is not always necessary. I think it's important to throw that out there. What is necessary is knowing something about the thing you choose to talk about.
Exactly.
or if or creating a world where it doesn't matter. But again, that's a limiting thing. You can't always manage that.
No.
And let me give you, for instance, when I was in college writing for workshop classes, Denoyer was always harping really hard on job stuff. In fact, we had one semester where he made us write 6 stories in one semester. Oh my God, that was. He said, "I'm gonna make fiction writing a class this year really hard," and he in one semester. I think we ultimately ended up only writing 5, but at the beginning he said we're gonna write 6, and most of the stories we wrote, he gave us. Usually when we would write stories for fiction writing classes, it would be open-ended. We could write about anything we wanted to. But he gave us themes, which was unusual and kind of a fun thing to have to write toward. And he wanted to give us the hardest things to do that he could think of. What I mean by hard, that writers tend to mess up because they're very difficult to do, and make us practice them. And so he made us do things like write a story where our protagonist is a child. That is very difficult to do. Child protagonists are really hard because you're not a kid anymore. You're an adult now, going back writing children, and they're difficult to make believable, because everything you want to put in their mouth is going to be either too sophisticated or not sophisticated enough. But another thing he did was he wanted us to write the job stuff story, and that was to take a job that we had done and write about it in detail, but not just write about it, write a story where that was a major component of it. At the time, I was living and working at a mortuary. I used to live in the basement of a mortuary. And my job...
Cheery.
What's that?
Cheery.
Oh, it was great. I loved it. In fact, I'll tell you this anecdote real quick because you said that. The following job I did, I worked at the mortuary for 2 years. And like I said, I lived there. I had a room. I didn't have a room board, but I had a room there. And I worked there for 2 years. And the very next job I got was at a toy store, just polar opposite. kind of job. And the first week I was there, and I'm not making this up, the first week I was at the toy store, I got so used to working funerals I worked funerals. I went out and helped get bodies. I got really used to it. And 2 years later, I'm working at a toy store, and somebody comes in and says, "It's my kid's birthday," and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, congratulations."
I'm sorry, your kid is still alive. What?
Yeah, I was like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, I'm sorry. No, you didn't just say your kid died. All right. But anyway, so I'm working at a mortuary, and I'm thinking, well, I've been looking for the opportunity to write about the mortuary, because I mean, you know, how many people get to write about that, and how many people get to write about it and know it pretty intimately and can make it believable. So I said, I'm gonna write a story about the mortuary, and it wasn't just simply like me writing about something that happened at the mortuary. What you do with something like that is you use that as the backdrop, and then you give details that make people say, wow, that this feels like an actual mortuary. You know things about it that I don't know, and it feels real. But then I create some interesting narrative set there, and obviously, again, you need a character that can propel that story along. But I had to set it someplace that I had worked. So I made the main character somewhat based on myself, but then I made his antagonist based on the guy who worked there with me. There were two of us that we worked opposite hours, or we worked opposite days. They were both part-time jobs, and he lived in the basement with me. He lived we each had our own apartments. And so I based the other character on that guy. Not that I didn't like him, but I made him somewhat the antagonist. And I made it a vampire story. So I wrote a story about a vampire who lived in a mortuary.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And what people said when they read it was I didn't expect the level of detail with the job stuff to ground this the way it did, because it's a heightened genre thing. It's got supernatural elements, but it's grounded because everything that's around it feels like it's really there and really happening, because I had credibility because I worked in a mortuary.
Right. Oh, that's really interesting.
But at the same time, and let me say this real quick, but at the same time, if I were right now to sit down, or back then, if I were right now to sit down and write a story about a police officer, I would not have that credibility because I don't know anything about being a police officer.
Right. And that's where the research comes in. That's where it's like, I want to understand how they operate. I think the important thing is, and this is something that you learn as you get more into characters, is that process becomes something you become more obsessed with. Let's use that word. It's like you want to learn not only what they do, the ins and outs of how they operate as police officers. It's like you want to realize this is how a police officer thinks about their job. This is how they view their job. Because, anyone can go on Wikipedia nowadays and look up how does an arrest work? How does a cop operate?
Yeah, that's not the sort of research we're talking about. We're talking about empirical.
No. Yeah, exactly. We're talking about how, like, I want to know, what is it like to have a gun pointed at you and have to talk your way out of it? Or what's it like to have your gun pulled on a drug dealer and have to make the decision to shoot him to save someone else's life? What is the
and even somewhat less dramatic things like that. I mean, even down to what is it like for the police officer to deal with the routine speeding ticket?
Right. Well, yeah, that too. It's like, how does a police officer feel when they pull someone over? One that I thought recently was like, how does a police officer feel whenever they walk into a public place without any intention to arrest somebody, and everyone just immediately like straightens their backs and looks really professional? Like I have this. Whenever I see a cop, I'm just like, anything that's not good, stop doing it. I don't know if you have that, but it's something I'm like, how does a police officer feel when they see people do that? They're like, fuck yeah, I'm a police officer, screw all you guys. Or they're like, oh, I don't want people to be scared of me. But that's something that I think is really important with a character, and something that I hope I would hope that would come out in my fiction. It's this a passion is the important word that comes into creative writing. It's a passion for whatever is going on in the story, whatever the story is trying to do. If you're writing a police officer, there has to be a passion either for or against being a police officer. There has to be emotion behind it. Because if you just do the routine ins and outs of being a police officer, then it's not very interesting.
Yeah, you don't want to do a day in a life story. I think it's also important I guess we're talking a little bit mechanics, but I'll mention this real quick. What you're talking about is occasion for story. You're talking about establishing a status quo and immediately breaking it. So you don't want to tell a story that's just what's it like being a police officer. You want to tell a story where what it's like being a police officer is involved in this unusual circumstance that came up that made it worth telling this story in the first place. Now, police officers probably have things that happen to them on a daily basis, a lot of them that might make for a good story, but if routinely a police officer finds themselves routinely, as in let's say monthly or every couple of weeks, finds themselves on drug busts and that sort of thing. What's unusual about this one? What happened this time that brings a character to a possible opportunity for change that they wouldn't have gotten on the last drug bust? How is the status quo different? What is the opportunity for story? The opportunity for story. So you have your inciting incident at the beginning that changes everything, that makes it not the same as it usually is. So the thing that I think a lot of writers miss, or a lot of beginning writers miss, is that the character that you're writing about existed before the story did.
Right. Exactly. Well, yeah, and that's something that that's why the opening scenes can always be some of the most important, because you have to get a sense. You have to have a character before you can have a character change. Is something
you got to know who they are. Now that doesn't mean that you write 20 pages of status quo.
No, because that's boring. Yeah.
It's not just boring, but it's not story. Occasion for story implies that the status quo has changed. You see what I'm saying? So I mean that's
I completely agree.
That's important. But you mentioned first, opening paragraphs, opening pages. There's another thing, and I'm sure people have heard me say this a million times if you're listening to this and you've listened to anything I've ever said. But one of the other things Neuer always said that stuck with me that I love repeating, because I think it bears repeating, is that nobody gives a crap about your story. No one cares.
That's encouraging.
No, but here's why it's important. It does sound like a really discouraging statement. The reason that people need to hear it is because beginning writers very often get into their head that they have this brilliant idea that everybody is going to want to listen to,
right?
And nobody cares until you get them to read. You cannot assume. Because it's not true. You cannot assume that everybody that picks up your writing expects it to be amazing. And you also have to remember that people have better things to do than read something by someone they've never heard of before. And also, even if you are somebody people have heard of before, you still should live by that statement. Even if you've published before, you should live by that, because it's so important for those opening paragraphs to hook a person in such a way where they won't even think about putting it down. Mm-hmm. It has to go from a chore to something that they uncontrollably have an urge to do.
Right. Yeah.
Keep them reading, and it's really important. Now, your job is exactly the same as the job of somebody, making a television show on a weekly basis. Maybe they watch the first 4 episodes, but what is it going to take to get them to watch the 5th without being gimmicky if you can help it? That's really, really important. Those opening lines being engaging and being and immediately making a person say, "Wow, I would never have thought to phrase it like that."
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the things that makes, what we do one of the hardest things, I think, to take up as a profession, because no one has a need necessarily to read a book.
I don't think anybody should take writing up as a profession.
Well, a lot of people do.
But not nearly as many as would like to. What I mean by that is, I'm not saying that you should not have aspirations. I'm not trying to crush anybody's hopes and dreams. What I mean is, you cannot assume that because you want to do it, it's going to happen for you. I think it's important that people are sober enough to realize that most of us are not going to make a living writing. Most of us are not going to. That cannot be the reason you're doing it.
Oh no, it can't be because.
And that's my point. You cannot be doing it because you think it's going to be a career. The writing life has nothing to do with making money.
No, not at all. And that's something we definitely should have established earlier. Is like, you can't go into writing and be like, oh, I'm going to be a really famous novelist.
It's great if it happens, but you've got you've got to have a real passion for it. You've got to write for the same reason that what's the character? As Dr. Noonien Sung in Next Generation said, why does a boxer box and why does a painter paint? They're not doing it necessarily because they're making a living at it. Most people that get to where they're making a living at doing anything artistic put thousands of hours into it before they ever saw a dime. And I think that's a very important thing for people to keep in mind. I also think something I like to say, and this is not a Denoyer quote. This is Captain Logan. Something I like to tell people too is allow yourself to write bunches of crap before you finally write something good. You're gonna write bad things, and allow yourself to write bad things. Don't feel like you have to show your bad things to anybody, but you're gonna write better when you get real constructive criticism, which usually does not come from family or really good friends, because most people are not willing to give you real criticism. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind too. But yeah, let yourself write bunches of crap. Something that I've read, a statistic I've read in a lot of different places, and I don't know how true this really is that it takes 100,000 hours before you ever really get good at anything. That you have to engage. I think that was the number. You have to engage in an activity for 100,000 hours before you will ever become not just proficient, but great at it. And that doesn't mean that everybody that does it for 100,000 hours will be great. But it takes that many hours before you even have a chance at being one of the best people at anything.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, someone is not gonna, you're not gonna write one book that is suddenly gonna make you the next William Shakespeare or the next J.K. Rowling. It's not gonna happen.
Yes,
You have
you
to.
might, but lightning ain't gonna hit that bottle twice.
No, yeah,
Yeah.
you have to.
Something that professors always told me, and I believe that believe they're right about this, is that if you're really gonna become a writer, first of all, I know this sounds stupid. There are people that have written things that call themselves writers, but they're not writers because they don't write anymore. You have to write to be called a writer. I'm just saying, you have to write. You have to do it. You have to stay in practice. Artists need to draw. You gotta stay in practice. An athlete needs to exercise. And so, people who write a couple of short stories and then 5 years later they're still calling themselves writers, I'm not convinced at that. They might still be decent at it. They might be able to sit down and start writing again. But right now, I'm not sure that it's quite fair that you say, "Oh, I'm a writer." I think that if you're going to take it seriously, if you're gonna see it as a craft and take it seriously, you got to be honing it all the time. And I think people that really want to hone their skills should be writing something every day. I don't mean it has to be fiction. I just mean that you should be sitting down writing something every day. Whether you're doing writing exercises, whether you're writing reviews for a blog, whether you're writing other kinds of blogs or fan fiction, whatever it is. But keep those language skills up, and Twitter and texting doesn't count.
That leaves me out. No. Well, I completely agree with you, and it's something where it's like.
Again, that's not to turn anybody off. That's not to say I didn't mean to interrupt, but I'm going to forget this. It's not to say that you can't try it out. That's not to say that you can't occasionally use it as a hobby. But I mean, like people that are serious writers are writing all the time.
Yeah. Well, you have to. And this gets back to the passion thing. You have to have a passion for where you're gonna want to do it every day. I just made a movie, and the whole time I was making the movie, I was like, I can't wait for this thing to be done, because as soon as it's done, I am not touching a camera for one full week until I'm good and ready, until I'm rested. And guess what I'm doing right now, 3 days after the movie wrapped? I mean, this isn't a camera, but we're having a conversation where we're trying to entertain people, we're trying to enlighten people. We're still.
Oh, is that what we're doing? Oh man, I'm sorry, I'm failing. I should change my tack a little bit.
That's so you're doing a better job than I am. I'm half asleep. It's just like there's not a day that goes by where I don't want to do something creative. It might not happen because I've got other commitments, but it's like. It's one of those things where you have to have a passion for it. And if you don't have a passion for it, you're never going to find success in it. And if you do, I'm going to hate you as a person. It's like if I see a singer who has no, talent, let's put it that way, who doesn't like singing, I'm just like, oh, go fuck yourself. And they're got bags of money, and all they do is sit around all day and be pampered. Because they made a lot of money because they recorded one song. And I'm just like, you know what? Fuck you. You made that one song. Great for you. You got bags of money. I'm going to go over here and love what I do. And, it's a victory and it's a defeat at the same time. But yeah, I completely agree with you.
I don't feel malice toward people like that. Those people aren't artists, I mean, they're... that's okay for them, whatever. That's not what I'm in things for, you know what I mean? If you're making art, people will sometimes say, hey, what do you think is the definition of art? What is art? I don't know. To me, art is simply something that you do because you were compelled. Because you have to, because there is something in you that will not allow you to be happy until you're doing this. I hope I don't sound snooty when I say this. This is not me saying I am a great writer. This is me saying that I love to write and I don't know how not to. So for me, if I go long enough without working on anything, I'm unhappy. I'm unfulfilled. I have to work. I have to write things.
You have to be creative.
That's how I am, and that's why the video output has been what it's been for the last couple of years. That's what I do to keep myself happy. I've got to be working. I've got to be writing things, and so that's how I do it. I'm just saying that like does that make me an artiste? I don't know, but I feel that way with other people. I feel like real artists are compelled to make art, and people that just want a paycheck might put out something that one thing you can consider art, but I'm not sure they're artists. You know.
No, yeah. Well, this is where the angry teenager part of me comes out, where I'm just like, "Fuck those people! Fuck them right up the ass! They're horrible people." That's where that side comes out of me, and you're like, "No, calm down."
I lost that side of me a long time ago. Well, I should also mention that and this will just be a joke, but if you're that like angry or upset about it, just do me a favor and do not write a poem about it.
Well, Cap, while you were talking, I kind of wrote something in the text bar.
I was writing this crappy poem, Cap, and I just got to send it to you so you can. My great. Ooh, are you gonna send me a bad poem? Do I get to read it out loud?
No, I'm not. I'm kidding. I didn't actually do this.
Oh, I was excited. I was really excited to read Zazubaar's bad poem.
I don't write bad poetry. Everything I create is perfect.
I've written bad poetry.
No, I'm kidding.
I wrote a poem in college about the Brave Little Toaster.
What?
Yeah.
You know what the Brave Little Toaster is?
Oh yeah, I grew up with it.
Really? I thought it was the only person alive who knew what that was.
No, I grew up with it. You're probably the only person you know. But like I don't know. A lot of people my age know what Brave Little Toaster is and grew up with it.
It's weird because I was
Toaster was like 87, 88, I think.
Yeah, I didn't, it wasn't something I watched a lot, but I remember watching it as a kid and be like, that's a weird ass movie.
I was terrified by it. I had nightmares, and then I wrote a poem about how I had nightmares. And
please tell me. I don't. You're probably not going to remember it from memory, but like, what was the overall gist of the poem?
Give me a second. Let's see if I have it.
Oh my God, do you have it?
I might have it. Hold on.
Oh my God, that's crazy. Everyone, this is a exclusive Geekvolution archive thing on Zazubaar's channel.
I'm not saying it's gonna be good, but I think I've got it here. Hold on.
Well, while you're looking for that, I'm going to say this.
Yeah.
We were talking about workshops earlier. I took a workshop over the summer, and of course, it's billed as a creative writing workshop. My lisp is coming out. And creative writing.
Whiting. where the moderator was Elmer Fudd.
He was the one teaching the class. But I took a workshop over the summer and last summer, and it was it was billed as prose writing, and it wasn't really prose writing. It was more poetry. I hate poetry. And I'll read it. It's fine. I can't stand doing it. I can't. I can't do it. It's too constrictive for me because I'm not someone who's like, every single line has to be dissected and like, it has to mean this thing. I don't know. I'm more of like a character guy. I'm more of a dialogue person. That's not what poetry is.
I'm the same way. I used to be more that way. My final year, senior year in college, I finally took a poetry course. And I had no intention on taking poetry. Incidentally, I ended up taking a course in, at least one course, most of them more than one, in every genre of writing offered except for creative nonfiction, which I really wanted to do, and I just never was able to get into that course. But I finally took a poetry class reluctantly. I didn't need it. I had already fulfilled all my creative writing credits, but I had a class requirement I had to fill, and I was like, all right, I'll take poetry finally. And it changed my mind a little bit. I will say it did change my mind a little bit. It opened me up for some ways of thinking I hadn't done before. There was some BS in it, man. There was some crackpot nonsense, in my opinion. Some things that they called art that I didn't see how it could possibly be considered art. There was some real nonsense. I'm not going to go into what exactly, but there were a few things where I was just like, that's preposterous. How can you call that art? Well, I'll tell you this one. There was one thing where, I don't know what it was called. They had names for all these things, and I was like, wow, we are trying really hard to make all of this sound like an art, where people would take like like random lines they found in like magazines or newspapers or whatever, and then they would like throw them all together in a blender, and then like they read them, and that was poetry. And right? Well, okay. Here's the thing. I think it can be interesting to try to derive meaning out of things that originally nobody intended on having to mean anything. Like, that wasn't a sentence, but I'm going to move on. Where like I do this to a point. There are times where I will find threads in a narrative that I know the writer probably didn't intend, and yet there they are. It doesn't negate the fact that they're there, and so that can be very interesting. But this was not that. This I was just like, well, it's a fun little exercise, but no one should publish that. But one thing that I did. I had this interesting anecdote now, and I've lost it, Zazubaar. I'm gonna think of it. I just know it's gonna come back to me. Well, anyway, it's not there now. I'm sorry, I forgot what it was.
That's okay.
It was related to all of that. I know what it was.
Go for
talking about things that end up showing up in narratives that were not intended. Because after all, pieces stand on their own. Pieces will speak to you in a way that the author was not speaking to you. And I wrote a paper in a Shakespeare course. And it's really one of my favorite things I wrote in college. I wrote a paper in a Shakespeare course about how there was evidence in the play that Hamlet knew he was in a play.
What? Oh wow!
Yeah, and that was one of the most fun things I've ever come up with, because it just baffled me that I could make this argument, and it was a ludicrous argument.
Yeah.
But there it was, and I mean, anybody could read that and say, well, you're reaching, you're looking for things, you're looking too far into it, and I was, and yet there it was. There was all this evidence that Hamlet, because that's a play. The whole play within a play thing is really famous in Hamlet. He's there's all this stuff where he's talking about plays and about being on stage and what all of that is like, and you can see Shakespeare. You can see Shakespeare's writing coming out in him, where basically the point I was making was that Hamlet and Shakespeare kind of become one person in certain
very true
of the play, and so it was as if Hamlet is on stage, knowing that he's on stage.
Yeah, well,
and that was kind of fun.
No, yeah, I bet it's like it sounds like fun words. Like I can convince you that Hamlet was an alien from another planet.
I think you can, though.
Oh, I beg to differ, sir. I will pull. Well, it is almost knocked my phone off.
It will be more ridiculous than what I wrote. I promise you.
No, I will try. Now you have compelled. Tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I'm just going to reread Hamlet, and I'm just going to pull out individual words that point out that Hamlet is an alien.
That's not what I did. It was not a non-contextual. Like,
no, I know. I'm kidding. But it's like it almost comes to like it's almost like life imitating art or art imitating life in that way, where it's like in that play, Hamlet changes one of the plays that they perform to fit the situation he wants to play out with his uncle.
Yes.
And it's just kind of like he's obsessed with theatrics, obviously. Just
it's like me. Oh.
Indeed. I wonder if the Joker was a Hamlet fan.
Joker fan.
But
Hamlet fan, yeah.
No, but it's interesting that you were bringing that up, and but to get back to that workshop I was taking, the reason why I don't like writing poetry is because I think it's harder to get to what you want to say, and harder to I feel like it's a lot harder to get across what you want to say, but also to kind of it's a little bit more restrictive because you can't really have dialogue in a poem. You can't really have necessarily a fight scene in a poem or whatever. It's very hard. You can have poetics in a fight scene. You can have poetics in dialogue, but you can't. it's very difficult to put that into poetry itself. But really, the thing that most annoys me about poetry is that there's structures for it. You know what I mean? It's like there's very particular structures that you have to fit it inside of, and if it doesn't, people oftentimes debate whether or not it's even a poem. Like every single poem I wrote in that workshop was free verse. None of it was like, oh, this fits into like a sonnet. This is, Petrarchian sonnet, the Shakespearean sonnet, whatever. None of it fit in that because I find that boring. I find that
it's a fun exercise. I mean, I don't know if I'm always going to get stuff out of it that I'm going to want to read to people, but it's fun to limit yourself in that way and see what you can get.
Maybe, I don't know. Well, I've never tried it in that way, but it's like in that setting, I was like, I want to, an idea would strike me. I want to do like
Oh, it's constrictive. Most.
Yeah, it's especially hard when like, okay, you have 40 minutes, go do it.
I think it's a good. Here's what I think it's a good exercise for. And yeah, sure, it's not as much fun in a classroom. But few things are. I think that what's fun about that, or what it can. I'm sorry, what it can be very good for as an exercise is reminding yourself of vocabulary that you have that you're not going to use all the time. It stretches your lexicon.
That's true. That's very true.
I think it's actually good for writers to sit down and write poetry sometimes just to stretch their lexicon because something I discover writing reviews all the time, because obviously I do a lot more nonfiction writing now than I do fiction writing, and something I notice is because I'm writing about a lot of the same sorts of things, it diminishes my vocabulary a little bit. I find myself using a lot of the same words all the time, because there's only so many words to use to say things about narrative, to critically analyze narrative, and to do different kinds of writing, you're going to be stretching yourself and using other kinds of words. That's also why reading all the time is really important too, to keep building that vocabulary. But you can't just build vocabulary; you also have to use it, because you might learn new words, but if you never use them, then you'll forget you have them.
Right.
So anyway, I'm sorry, that's neither here nor there, but poetry for vocabulary's sake.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because it forces you to use particular word choice, and it wasn't the worst thing ever. It wasn't like, and I've written poems that I would not mind sharing with people, but it's like it's not my thing at all. And I would never. I don't know, maybe the 50-year-old me will listen to this podcast and be like, listen to that fucking retard. Because it's just like...
Well, hey, I don't want to sound like somebody's grandpa or anything, but I mean, I'm what? Almost a decade older than you?
About that, yeah.
You're gonna be different in 10 years. You know what I mean?
Well, obviously, of course.
You're gonna look at things differently. You're gonna have all of these events in your background and things under your belt, and you're gonna look at things differently. When I was your age, I didn't want to say that. I didn't want to say I was your age. At 18 or 19, I effing hated poetry. I hated reading other people's poetry. I thought it was sometimes a little bit fun to write my own, but I didn't do much of it, and I also, even at that point, thought that 99% of high school poetry was complete nonsense.
Yeah.
Which was true.
Yeah, well, a lot of it is. Well, and there's merit. Of course, there's merit to poetry. There are poems I like, but a lot of it, I'm just like, it's not inherently interesting to me. When I first read a poem, I'm just like, it's just kind of like noise at some point.
Maybe you said that, Zazubaar. I'm going to read you a poem.
Oh, yeah. Did you find it?
Oh, I found it.
Oh, yay. All right, everyone. Exclusive. Captain Logan archive.
I'm not promising this is going to be any good.
Oh, I don't care if it sucks. It's going to be good.
This is this poem I wrote. All right, this poem is called I Am Not a Toaster.
Oh, God. Here we go.
Here's my poem. I can't believe I'm reading this. All right, here's my poem. I am 5 years old. The world isn't right. There's a thermostat with a face, and he's broken, and he's screaming. There's a vacuum cleaner, and he has a face too, and he talks in a low voice and keeps accidentally sucking up things he doesn't want to. Everything has a face. The radio that can't get reception, the appliances at the repair store, and they all keep singing songs. There's also a clown. It's evil, and it's chasing them. I don't think I can handle this world. I am not brave. I am not a toaster.
That was actually pretty good. No, it's like it was like it was a child's nightmare put into poetry form, and then it had an ironic twist on the title of the movie. That was it. That was interesting.
Thanks. Well, that's how I intended it. So good job. Good read on my really deep poem.
Thank you. I proud myself on my analysis.
So much thought into that poem.
It's funny. I wish I had something, because now you probably like, oh, I'm going to go dig into my archive and pull out something really strange from my history. I have a bad history.
Only if you want to get made fun of.
No, oh, dude, trust me. It's okay. If you hang out in my circle of friends, your self-esteem will be lowered drastically.
I was joking. Surely you got something in there that's cool.
Well, here's the thing. I have a bad history with my computers. If my computers were sentient, they would hate me because I treat them like shit.
You should.
Huh?
You should work on that.
No, in this one, the one I'm using right now has been fairly okay for the. Well, Sid Part 2 ruined it, so it's his fault.
Wait,
on that.
How did he ruin it?
Because we were going to do an episode of Geeky Gentleman on the Green Lantern animated series, and I had never seen the show, and I don't really care about Green Lantern, so I didn't really want to buy it. So he's like, okay, I'm going to send you a torrent link, and for about a week I put off, and this is around the time Hurricane Sandy hit my area, so everything I had was in shambles. I was running everything off a generator, so my computer was running slow anyway. And and when the night finally came where I had to download it, he's just like, okay, Daniel, I'll walk you through it. Because I'm like, I don't know what download buttons to push. Just, help me out. And when I tried to do it, everything on my computer turned into a Windows Media Player file. And I couldn't access anything. Because all of it was like, just wouldn't open. I couldn't get on the internet. Nothing worked. So I spent about 3 days trying to figure out how to fix it. And so finally I called them and I was like, go fuck yourself. I'm erasing everything on my computer. And I had to start from scratch, and I was so angry.
You know what my favorite thing is about that story?
What?
Not to laugh at your expense, because that's horrible. But my favorite thing about that story is that Sid Part 2 ruined your computer without even being in the same room. I've met Ian in real life, and he didn't tap my knees or kick his face or anything, man. But boy, like across states, he ruined your computer.
He did kidnap you though, even though I had an indirect part in that.
That's true. That happened, but that didn't really happen.
It happened in the hearts and minds of Geeky Gentlemen listeners everywhere.
I actually met him. Met him.
No, I know. I remember that. I remember
Sonic the Hedgehog. It was
he was, and I was like, oh.
And I'll tell a story he probably doesn't want me to tell.
He'll listen to this too, so he'll be pissed at me.
Ian. I'm sure he won't really mind. Ian accidentally left his keys in his hotel room, so we had to drive him back to his hotel room.
Oh, wow.
That was kind of funny. It's not a great story or anything, but that happened.
Oh, I was like, what's the story?
No, just it was kind of funny because he was all alarmed about it. He was like, oh man, I left my keys, and then I was like, well, that's okay because the hotel's over there, and I'll drive you over there, and then. But anyway, so yeah.
Oh, Ian panicking is funny. The image of just Captain Logan, my keys are gone.
Wow, that is a really good Ian impression too.
Oh, Cap, I have learned. That was my bullshit Ian impression.
He's like, no, I have an authentic one you haven't even heard.
I do, because we did 5 minutes on Geeky Gentlemen where each of us impersonated each other.
See, Ian's a lot of fun. I did that with Vince real early on, and I love that.
I remember that. That was funny. And we did it. Ian was Milan, I was Ian, and then Milan was me. Milan's impersonation of me was terrible.
Yeah. Well,
because
I imagine it would be because Milan has a really deep voice, and I'm just not sure how he'd pull that off.
Well, and I have a high pitched voice, and also,
yeah.
I constantly wear the fact that I'm from New York on my sleeve, and I don't really have an accent. I don't know. Well, maybe that's just me. I don't know. Do I have an accent, or I mean, I don't think I do.
I don't not a very thick one at all.
No, I mean, it only comes out when I'm angry. That's the one part where it does. If you listen to me yell, that's when it comes.
You
like,
wouldn't like Zazubaar's accent when he's angry.
Oh no, very much so. That's when you hear the Jersey Shore come out in my voice, or like the Real Housewives of Long Island, which I'm so sad that got made because that ruins the reputation of my home area. Anyway, to get back to the story, so we impersonated each other, and Milan started out. He was like, okay, I don't know how to do Zazubar, so I'm just going to do a New York accent and then talk about Godzilla for 5 minutes.
Is that what he did?
And I'm like, yeah, that's all he did. And I'm just like, Milan, that's not me. The Godzilla part was absolutely true. But like the New York accent is, so he devolved really quickly. Ian did a spot on Milan though, and I did.
Now, did he do regular Milan or creepy Milan?
He did creepy Milan.
That's what I would have done. I would have immediately started talking really slow and delirious. I am Milan Jeff. Like I would have gone like this, like crazy deep throat. Yeah.
Hello everyone, I am Milan Jeftik 1992, and I am here today to tell you about how when I was a child I was molested by a dog.
That's the kind of stories Milan tells, especially if you listen to his Jebediah Springsteen series. And if you want to have nightmares, listen to that series. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's fucked up.
Well, I'm not gonna. I promise you, if I do that, I won't write poetry about it.
No, please. Oh God, he would.
About Milan's creepy talking series.
But Cap, if you did, he would love you forever. Not that he already doesn't, but if you did that, you would be like his non-homo life mate. Anyway, so here I'm going to show off my Ian impression. That's why this anecdote got started.
Okay, all right, good.
Oh, okay, I gotta, cause I listen to him every week, so it's like I gotta get into that like geeky gentleman introduction mode. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentleman. I'm Sid Part 2, and with me today I have the wonderful Captain Logan. Welcome, Cap. So I wanted to do this because I think that it's philosophically interesting to debate the ins and outs of of Batman's cowl. Because you see, Cap, I don't know if you're aware of this, but Plato once said that when you put on a mask, the mask becomes a representation of the society in which you were born in. So, thus, Batman is a representation of our own society. So, Milan, shut the fuck up. And if you see this, then you truly you enlighten yourself. And Bill, stop talking about Godzilla. So it devolves.
That actually kind of does sound like him. I mean, like what's funny is you both have similar vocal timbres, so all you have to do is go up about like a step and a half.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he doesn't have an accent or anything, so no.
Then slightly round your vowels out more. Like that's about all you had to do. It's weird because especially when you started, it really did sound like him. I was like, wow.
Yeah, well,
it really does sound like him.
Yeah, well, when you talk to him as much as I do, it's like it just comes out because it's like you listen, and he does a good me also, which is funny. Because also he listens to all my reviews, so he picks up mannerisms that I do that I don't even notice. Because if you listen to one of my videos, and we're way off topic at this point, but I don't care. I clap whenever I start a video, and I don't do it intentionally. I just kind of, and I did it when we started recording the podcast. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm just like, okay, hello everybody, I am Zazubaar. And whenever he does an impersonation of me, he always starts out with a clap, and it really cracks me up because I'm like, I don't.
Like, oh wait, do I do that? Oh man, I guess I do that.
Yeah, it doesn't register with me, but I'm like, I do that. And it's funny because when we first started talking a lot, this is after the Who Reviews the Reviewers contest had ended. Before we started doing Geeky Gentleman, he was like, he always thought, oh, I always thought you did that because it was so you knew when to start cutting the video. Like you would cut out the little part before you started talking. I'm like, no, I'm not that clever.
That's the first thing I thought when you said that.
Oh no,
some people do that.
Yeah, I don't. He does that. I don't do it that way. It's just natural. Anyway, so well, we're 2.5 hours in.
Yeah. I don't know. We probably covered the gamut on that.
Yeah, and I think that now that we've devolved into talking about people we know, that it's getting about time to end out the podcast. But just kind of rounding out on creative writing. I mean, we could spend another half hour summing it up, but I think that what we've kind of discussed here today is that what is kind of the mindset that you should have if you do want to be a writer, if it's something that you have a passion for already that can kind of accentuate it. And I think we've gotten some good advice out of this, and I just like to thank Cap. Thank you so much for coming on, because you said a lot of really insightful things. I think that if aspiring writers listen to it, that I think that they can take some really great things away from what you said. So thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, hey, no problem, man. I hope I didn't just regurgitate too many things I've said before. Yeah, I don't know. I wanted to make sure and try to say some things I thought were helpful.
No, it was really, and this is also really fun to talk about, because again, it's something that I do. And I know something that you do, and it's not something that you get to talk about a lot. And I know and you do, but it's like I don't get to communicate with a lot of people who do it also. So it's interesting to kind of compare notes on how you do it.
Well, clearly, it's my favorite thing to talk about. That's why I review. I'm talking about creative writing every time I do a review. All of my stuff is from a story perspective, and so I'm talking narrative every day.
Yeah, so it's something that we obviously live in. So it's like we live in a house made out of creative writing, Cap.
Yeah, wow, that's cool. It's the house that creative writing built.
It became a tangible creature and built a house.
Yeah, it built a house, and it's got like lollipops on it, and oh wait. No, that would be the gingerbread house. Oh.
No, that's not the creative writing house. That's
not the right house. That's the house.
Mansion.
That's the house where you get baked in an oven if you're there too long. That's not.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one the witch lives in. Anyway, so this was the first recorded episode of Zcast, and this is of course the one where we talked about creative writing. So I had a lot of fun. This was kind of the thing where this is where I decided if I'm going to make this a series. And I don't know, I had a lot of fun talking about this kind of stuff, and kind of exploring the structure I want for the social. I'm definitely going to continue it. Cap, thank you so much for being here. I had a lot of fun discussing this with you.
Yeah, no problem, man. It was fun.
All right. Well, that's it for this edition of Zcast on creative writing. I don't know what we're going to be talking about next time, because this is technically the first episode. We're doing all kinds of crazy time warp stuff. Of course, the first episode was about high school, and then the next ones, Nickel will probably be there, so we'll have some interesting discussions. Adam's going to come on at one point, so we've got some more stuff coming for you, so look forward to that in the future, and look forward to some more stuff coming from me in the future with the Godzilla Gang, and of course the movie's coming out soon. Again, the release date for that is June 31st. I don't know when this is going up in relation to that. I don't know if it's like a week before or God knows how long before. But the movie is done and it's coming, so get excited. Thank you very much for listening. I'm Zazubaar.
Oh, I'm Captain Logan.
Yes, he is. Everyone always gets... Man, I did a video with Manos the other day, too. He had the same thing. He's like, oh, I'm supposed to say bye. Anyways, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all soon. And one more thing. If you haven't already subscribed to Geekvolution, what the hell's wrong with you? Go do it. Anyway, so thank you very much for watching, and see you later.